If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My brother's face stared up at me from beneath the dark water, his eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a silent scream. I lunged forward, my hands breaking the surface, but he slipped deeper into the murky depths. Then I woke up gasping, same as always. That nightmare's been with me for 30 years, ever since Tommy drowned in these waters. Some mornings I can still taste the swamp water I swallowed trying to save him. My name's Leroy Jackson. I'm 52 years old and I've spent my whole life in the Okefenokee Swamp. Being a ranger here isn't just my job, it's who I am. My daddy was a ranger, and his daddy before him. Some might say the swamp's in our blood. This morning started like any other. The sun wasn't up yet when I pushed my canoe into the water. A thick mist hung over everything, making the cypress trees look like giants standing in the fog. Their knobby knees poked up through the water like they were trying not to drown. Most folks would find it spooky out here alone, but to me, it's home. I know every channel, every island, every tree with a shape worth remembering. Don't need maps. Never have. The swamp was talking this morning. Frogs croaking, insects buzzing, birds calling back and forth. I've learned to listen to this chatter. It tells me when things are normal and when they ain't. I paddled through the winding channels, checking the spots where poachers sometimes set up. My canoe barely made a sound. 30 miles from the nearest outpost, I was as alone as a person can get these days. Around my neck hung my daddy's old ranger badge. Some might call it superstition, but I think of it more as keeping him with me. His voice still comes to me sometimes. The swamp provides, but the swamp takes away too, Leroy. Never forget that. The only person I talk to regular out here is Marie Thibodeau. She's old enough to be my mama and twice as wise. Lives on a small island about 2 hours from my cabin. Folks in town call her a witch, but I know better. She's just someone who understands plants and healing better than most doctors I've met. By midday, the sun was beating down something fierce. The air felt heavy, like it does before a big storm. Weather report had called for rain. Nothing unusual for summer, but something felt off. The pressure was dropping too fast. That's when I noticed the first strange thing. The big bull alligator that always suns himself on the fallen oak by Cypress Point wasn't just sliding into the water as I approached. He was already gone. In his place was nothing but wet marks on the log. I paddled past Turkey Island where a whole colony of herons usually nests. The place was empty. Dead, quiet. No birds calling, no wings flapping. Nothing. The water didn't look right either. In some channels it seemed to be flowing against the current. In others it swirled in perfect circles with nothing to cause such movement. I've been alone so long I sometimes talk to the swamp. Not that I'd tell anyone else that. What's got you so stirred up today? I asked the water below me. For the first time in my life I felt like it might actually answer back. I checked my compass as I headed toward the back islands, places most folks never see. The needle spun wildly for a moment, then settled, pointing south. But the sun told me that was wrong. I was headed east. Something wasn't right in my swamp, and whatever it was, I had a feeling it was just beginning. I pushed my canoe deeper into the back channels where the trees grow so thick they block out the sun. The air got cooler there, but the feeling of something being wrong only got stronger. That's when I saw it. Water that didn't look like water anymore. It was black, not the normal tea-colored brown of the swamp, but black like old motor oil, and thick. When I dipped my paddle in, it stuck for a second before pulling free with a sound, like someone unsticking their boots from mud. "What in the world?" I whispered. I scooped up a little in an empty jar I keep for water samples. It didn't flow like normal water. It moved slow, like honey or syrup, but it was cold to the touch. The smell hit me next. Not the usual swamp smells, of plant rot and earth, but something sharper, chemical. Like the smell behind the old factory that closed down last year after all the protests about their waste dumping. A splash made me turn quick. A fish had surfaced, belly up, but it didn't look right. Fish that die in the swamp don't last long. Turtles, birds, and other fish see to that. But this one looked like it had been dead for days, yet nothing had touched it. Its eyes were cloudy, white, but its body wasn't rotting. I counted 5 more dead fish as I paddled forward, then a water snake, and even a small raccoon floating at the edge of a grassy patch. All preserved somehow, like they'd been dipped in something that stopped nature from taking its course. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was moving in faster than I'd expected. Dark clouds rolled overhead, but something else caught my eye that made me forget all about the weather. The cypress trees along the bank ahead were twisted, not just bent from age or weather, but twisted like someone had grabbed them and wrung them like wet towels. Their branches pointed down into the water in ways that trees just don't grow. "This ain't natural," I said aloud, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. My radio crackled to life in my pack, making me jump. I hadn't turned it on today to save the battery, but there it was, making a sound like rushing water. I pulled it out and checked. Sure enough, it was switched to off. Yet the sound continued, getting louder as I moved toward a small island ahead. I recognized the place. It was where a university research team had set up camp last month to study water quality. They'd gotten permission to stay 6 weeks. It had only been 4, but as I approached, I could see their camp was empty. I tied up my canoe and stepped onto the muddy shore. Their tents were still there, equipment too. A pot sat on the cold fire pit with what looked like beans dried to the bottom. Papers were scattered around like they'd been caught in a wind, but there hadn't been strong winds for weeks. "Hello," I called out. "Anybody here?" Nothing but the sounds of the swamp answered me. Inside the main tent, I found half-eaten meals on plates, like everyone had jumped up in the middle of dinner. A laptop was still open, its battery long dead. Sleeping bags lay rumpled, personal items scattered around. Watches, books, a pair of glasses folded neatly beside a pillow. These weren't the signs of people who packed up and left. These were the signs of people who ran. I stepped back outside, and something caught my eye. Tracks in the mud. Big tracks, like nothing I'd ever seen before. 3 toes, each print nearly 2 feet long. They led from the water to the camp and then back to the water again. My skin went cold despite the muggy heat. In 52 years, I'd seen every creature the Okefenokee had to offer. Nothing made tracks like these. The wind picked up suddenly, hot and heavy with the coming storm. But it seemed to blow in a circle around me, like I was standing in the eye of a small tornado. The black water near the shore began to ripple, though there was nothing touching it. That's when I noticed the water level was rising. Not slowly like after rain, but fast. Inches every minute. The shore where I stood was shrinking, water creeping up toward the camp. I rushed back to my canoe, nearly slipping in the mud. As I pushed off from shore, I looked back at the island. The water around it was glowing faintly blue-green, like the bioluminescent algae sometimes seen in late summer, but it was too early in the year for that. And it was moving against the current, forming shapes that almost looked like letters before breaking apart again. The trees seemed to lean toward me as I paddled away, their branches reaching down like fingers trying to touch the water's surface. My radio crackled again. Through the static, I thought I heard a voice. Not clear enough to make out words, but it sounded like someone crying for help. I paddled harder, trying to put distance between me and that island, the preserved dead animals, the twisted trees, the strange tracks. But the feeling followed me. The feeling that the swamp, my swamp that I'd known all my life, had somehow become a stranger, and that it was watching me now with eyes I couldn't see. The storm hit as I made my way back toward safer waters. Rain pelted down in big drops that stung my skin. Lightning flashed, turning the swamp bright as day for split seconds, then plunging it back into a darkness deeper than any normal afternoon should be. I knew I needed shelter. The nearest solid ground was a small island with a hunter's shack I'd helped patch up years ago. I pointed my canoe that way, fighting against water that seemed determined to push me somewhere else. That's when I saw it, a glow beneath the water's surface following alongside my canoe. Not the scattered blue-green spots from before, but a solid light that moved with purpose. I paddled faster, my arms burning with the effort. The rain suddenly stopped directly above me, though I could still see it falling in sheets just 20 feet away in all directions. Like something had created a perfect circle of calm around my canoe. The water bulged upward beside me. I froze, paddle halfway through a stroke as a shape rose from the depths. It wasn't an alligator or a person or anything I had words for. It was the swamp itself, standing up. The thing towered over me, at least 8 feet tall. Its body looked made from twisted roots, hanging moss, and decaying leaves all packed together in the rough shape of a human. Water poured from it constantly, yet it never seemed to get smaller. Where a face should have been, there was only a hollow space filled with glowing mushrooms that pulsed with light, blue, then green, then a sickly yellow. The pattern made my head hurt to look at, but I couldn't look away. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking for the first time in decades. The thing didn't speak. Instead, I felt a pressure in my ears, painful like diving too deep underwater. But in that pressure were words, somehow. Guardian, protector, vengeance. I reached for the pistol. I keep wrapped in waterproof cloth beneath my seat. My hands shook as I aimed and fired twice. The bullets passed right through the creature, leaving holes that immediately filled with writhing plant matter and tiny insects. It reached toward me with an arm made of intertwined vines. I swung my paddle, slicing through its limb. But the separated pieces simply melted back into the water, and a new arm formed to replace what I'd cut away. I turned to flee, but the water around me had become thick as concrete, holding my canoe in place. The creature leaned down, bringing its hollow face close to mine. The smell hit me like a wall. Rotting vegetation, stagnant water, and something else, something chemical and wrong. From all around me came movement. Alligators swam in a circle around my canoe, their eyes reflecting the glow from the creature. Snakes slithered across the surface of the water as if it were solid ground. A chorus of frogs grew deafening, then stopped all at once, leaving a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. The pressure in my ears returned, stronger this time. You know me, Leroy Jackson. You have always known me, and somehow, in some terrible way, I did know it. This thing was the swamp, or some part of it that had never shown itself before. The water around my canoe began to swirl, forming into tentacle-like shapes that rose up and hovered, poised to strike. One brushed against my arm, cold as ice and solid as flesh. Then the creature did something that turned my blood to ice. The water in front of me rippled and formed into a scene, a perfect miniature version of the spot where Tommy had drowned 30 years ago. I even saw 2 tiny figures, me as a young man and my brother struggling in the water. You failed him. You fail me now. I didn't. I tried to save him, I choked out. The tiny scene played out differently than my memories. In this version, I turned away, leaving Tommy to drown while I paddled to shore. It was a lie, a terrible lie. That's not what happened, I shouted, anger burning through my fear. The creature's response was to make the water around my canoe churn violently. I grabbed the sides as it nearly flipped over. When I looked up again, the entity was gone, simply melted back into the swamp without a ripple. But I could still feel it watching me. The storm resumed as if someone had flipped a switch, rain pouring down again. I paddled frantically toward the hunter's shack, no longer certain it would offer any protection but having nowhere else to go. As I neared the small island, I saw the water around it was normal, not black or glowing. It felt like crossing a boundary into safe territory. I dragged my canoe up onto the muddy bank and stumbled toward the shack, my legs weak and shaking. Inside, I collapsed onto the dusty floor, my mind racing to make sense of what I'd seen. The creature had known my name. It had known about Tommy, and it seemed to blame me for something. But what? As night fell, I huddled in the shack with my flashlight and pistol, knowing neither would help me if that thing returned. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and occasionally, I'd see flashes of blue-green light moving beneath the water's surface. The swamp had awakened, and it was angry. The storm hit as I made my way back toward safer waters. Rain pelted down in big drops that stung my skin. Lightning flashed, turning the swamp bright as day for split seconds, then plunging it back into a darkness deeper than any normal afternoon should be. I knew I needed shelter. The nearest solid ground was a small island with a hunter's shack I'd helped patch up years ago. I pointed my canoe that way, fighting against water that seemed determined to push me somewhere else. That's when I saw it. A glow beneath the water's surface, following alongside my canoe. Not the scattered blue-green spots from before, but a solid light that moved with purpose. I paddled faster, my arms burning with the effort. The rain suddenly stopped directly above me, though I could still see it falling in sheets just 20 feet away in all directions. Like something had created a perfect circle of calm around my canoe. The water bulged upward beside me. I froze, paddle halfway through a stroke as a shape rose from the depths. It wasn't an alligator, or a person, or anything I had words for. It was the swamp itself, standing up. The thing towered over me, at least 8 feet tall. Its body looked made from twisted roots, hanging moss, and decaying leaves all packed together in the rough shape of a human. Water poured from it constantly, yet it never seemed to get smaller. Where a face should have been, there was only a hollow space filled with glowing mushrooms that pulsed with light. Blue, then green, then a sickly yellow. The pattern made my head hurt to look at, but I couldn't look away. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking for the first time in decades. The thing didn't speak. Instead, I felt a pressure in my ears, painful like diving too deep underwater. But in that pressure were words. Somehow, guardian, protector, vengeance. I reached for the pistol I keep wrapped in waterproof cloth beneath my seat. My hands shook as I aimed and fired twice. The bullets passed right through the creature, leaving holes that immediately filled with writhing plant matter and tiny insects. It reached toward me with an arm made of intertwined vines. I swung my paddle, slicing through its limb. But the separated pieces simply melted back into the water, and a new arm formed to replace what I'd cut away. I turned to flee, but the water around me had become thick as concrete, holding my canoe in place. The creature leaned down, bringing its hollow face close to mine. The smell hit me like a wall. Rotting vegetation, stagnant water, and something else, something chemical and wrong. From all around me came movement. Alligators swam in a circle around my canoe, their eyes reflecting the glow from the creature. Snakes slithered across the surface of the water as if it were solid ground. A chorus of frogs grew deafening, then stopped all at once, leaving a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. The pressure in my ears returned, stronger this time. "You know me, Leroy Jackson. You have always known me, and somehow, in some terrible way, I did know it. This thing was the swamp, or some part of it that had never shown itself before." The water around my canoe began to swirl, forming into tentacle-like shapes that rose up and hovered, poised to strike. One brushed against my arm, cold as ice and solid as flesh. Then the creature did something that turned my blood to ice. The water in front of me rippled and formed into a scene, a perfect miniature version of the spot where Tommy had drowned 30 years ago. I even saw two tiny figures, me as a young man and my brother, struggling in the water. You failed him. You fail me now. I didn't. I tried to save him, I choked out. The tiny scene played out differently than my memories. In this version, I turned away, leaving Tommy to drown while I paddled to shore. It was a lie, a terrible lie. That's not what happened, I shouted, anger burning through my fear. The creature's response was to make the water around my canoe churn, violently. I grabbed the sides as it nearly flipped over. When I looked up again, the entity was gone, simply melted back into the swamp without a ripple. But I could still feel it watching me. The storm resumed as if someone had flipped a switch, rain pouring down again. I paddled frantically toward the hunter's shack, no longer certain it would offer any protection, but having nowhere else to go. As I neared the small island, I saw the water around it was normal, not black or glowing. It felt like crossing a boundary into safe territory. I dragged my canoe up onto the muddy bank and stumbled toward the shack, my legs weak and shaking. Inside, I collapsed onto the dusty floor, my mind racing to make sense of what I'd seen. The creature had known my name. It had known about Tommy, and it seemed to blame me for something. But what? As night fell, I huddled in the shack with my flashlight and pistol, knowing neither would help me if that thing returned. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and occasionally I'd see flashes of blue-green light moving beneath the water's surface. The swamp had awakened, and it was angry. I grabbed my pack, the jar with Marie's mixture, and ran for my canoe. The black water was rising faster now, already covering the path I'd walked just minutes before. I pushed off from the dock just as water began spilling over it. The sky had turned dark again, though there hadn't been more storms in the forecast. A heavy, green-gray light hung over everything, making it hard to tell which direction I was headed. I pulled out my compass, but the needle spun wildly. Useless. I'd have to navigate by memory and instinct. "Hold on, Marie," I whispered, paddling hard. "I'm coming." I followed the direction I'd seen her small boat heading. The water grew thicker the farther I went, making each paddle stroke a struggle. Around me, the swamp was changing by the minute. Trees twisted and bent as I watched. Channels opened and closed like the swamp was breathing. A sound like distant thunder rolled across the water, but the sky above me was cloudless now. The thunder came again, and I realized it was coming from beneath me, from the water itself. Something bumped my canoe from below. Then again, harder. I gripped the sides as the craft rocked dangerously. A long, scaly form surfaced beside me, the biggest alligator I'd ever seen, at least 15 feet from snout to tail. Its eyes glowed with the same blue-green light as the entity's face. The gator swam alongside my canoe for a minute, watching me with those glowing eyes. Then it slipped beneath the surface again. I didn't feel relieved. I knew it was still down, there, following me. I spotted Marie's rowboat up ahead, empty and drifting. My heart sank as I paddled toward it. Had the entity gotten her? As I drew alongside the empty boat, I noticed something scrawled on the wooden seat in what looked like charcoal. "Heart is at Black Island. Center Pool. M. Black Island." I knew the place, an unnamed patch of land about half a mile further in, avoided by locals who claimed it was bad luck. I'd never seen anything there to worry about, but I hadn't been back in years. I tied Marie's boat to my canoe and kept going. The water around me was now completely black and thick as syrup. Things moved beneath the surface, shapes I couldn't identify and didn't want to. Lightning flashed overhead, though there were no storm clouds, just that strange green-gray light. In the brief brightness, I saw I wasn't alone on the water. Alligators swam in formation around me. Snakes slithered across the surface. Birds flew in tight circles overhead. All of them had those same glowing eyes. The pressure built in my ears again, and the voice of the entity filled my head. "You bring poison too. Poison me. You cannot stop the cleansing." "Where's Marie?" I shouted into the air. "What have you done with her?" "The Old One understands. She has joined with us, as you will." A shape rose from the water ahead, the entity but larger now, towering 15 feet above the surface. Its body had changed, become more solid, more defined. The hollow where its face should be now held dozens of glowing fungal growths, pulsing in patterns that made my vision blur. It raised an arm, and the water around my canoe surged upward, nearly capsizing me. I clutched the jar with the mixture, knowing I couldn't lose it. Black Island came into view behind the creature, a low hump of land covered in vegetation that seemed to move even without wind. At its center was a pool of water so dark it looked like a hole in the world. That had to be the heart, where Marie's journal said the entity's core would be found. But to reach it, I'd have to get past the Guardian itself. The creature brought both arms down, and a wave of black water washed over my canoe. I held on tight, but the force knocked me sideways. Water filled the craft, and it began to sink beneath me. I had seconds to decide. Clutching the jar in one hand and my pack in the other, I dove into the thick, black water. The cold hit me first, a bone-deep chill that seemed impossible in the summer heat. Then came the pressure, like being squeezed from all sides. The water felt alive, probing at me, trying to get into my mouth and nose. I kicked hard toward Black Island, breaking the surface with a gasp. The entity roared, a sound like trees breaking and water rushing all at once. It began to move toward me, each step creating waves that pushed me back. I swam harder than I ever had, fighting against water that seemed determined to drown me. Images flashed through my mind. Tommy struggling in the water all those years ago, his hand reaching for mine, slipping away. "Not this time," I grunted, forcing myself forward. My feet touched bottom and I staggered onto the shore of Black Island. The ground felt wrong beneath my boots, soft and yielding, almost like walking on flesh rather than earth. The entity emerged from the water behind me, no longer humanoid but a massive, shifting mass of vegetation, insects, and black water. It spread outward, surrounding the island, cutting off any escape. I ran toward the center of the island, following a path that seemed to form before me and disappear behind me. The trees leaned in as I passed, branches reaching for me like fingers. The center pool appeared ahead, a perfect circle of black water, still as glass despite the chaos around it. Below its surface, a pulsing mass of fungus glowed in shifting colors, lighting up the water from within. The heart of the entity. I uncapped the jar, ready to pour the mixture in, but as I knelt at the edge of the pool, the water erupted upward, forming into a shape I recognized. Marie stood before me, but not Marie as I knew her. Her body was semi-transparent, made of the same black water as the entity. Only her face looked solid, her eyes replaced with glowing fungal light. "Leroy," she said, her voice somehow both hers and not hers. "You don't understand what you're doing." "Marie, are you in there? Are you okay?" "I'm part of it now," she said. "Part of the cleansing. The swamp is fighting back against what's killing it. The chemicals, the pollution. It's too much this time. This thing is dangerous, Marie. It's changing everything, killing animals." "To save the whole," she interrupted. "Sometimes healing requires destruction first." Behind Marie, the main mass of the entity was approaching, absorbing trees and ground as it came. The island was shrinking. "The mixture," I said, holding up the jar. "Your grandmother's journal said it would calm the Guardian." Marie's water face looked sad. "It will destroy it. Destroy its heart. And the swamp needs its Guardian now more than ever." A deafening crack of thunder split the air. Real storm clouds had gathered overhead, black and heavy with rain. Lightning flashed, striking a tree at the edge of the island, setting it ablaze despite the dampness. Marie reached for me, her watery hand extending. "Join us, Leroy. Become part of the swamp you've protected all these years. Help us save it." For a moment, I was tempted to be part of something larger, to never be alone again. It pulled at something deep inside me. Then I thought of the abandoned research camp, the preserved animal bodies, the twisted trees. This wasn't protection, it was corruption. "I'm sorry." "Marie," I said and lunged forward, dumping the mixture directly into the center pool. Marie's water form collapsed with a cry that sounded like heartbreak. The pool began to bubble violently, the fungal mass writhing beneath the surface. Lightning struck again, not a tree this time, but the pool itself. The electricity hit the mixture, creating a chemical reaction I hadn't expected. Blue flame erupted, from the water's surface, spreading outward in a perfect circle. The entity shrieked, a sound that made my ears bleed and my vision go white with pain. The mass of it convulsed, sections breaking off and dissolving back into normal water and plant matter. I staggered backward as the blue fire spread across the island. The ground beneath me began to sink, the whole island collapsing in on itself. I turned and ran for the shore, jumping over fallen trees and bubbling pools of disintegrating plant matter. Behind me, a massive explosion of light and sound erupted from the center pool. The force of it knocked me forward onto my face. When I looked back, the heart pool was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of normal-looking water. The entity was breaking apart all around me, its massive form dissolving into separate components. Water returning to water, plants to plants, animals fleeing in all directions with their eyes no longer glowing. I reached the shore as the last solid ground of Black Island sank beneath the surface. With nowhere else to go, I dove into the water again, normal water this time, though churning violently from the island's collapse. I swam blindly through the chaos, lungs burning, arms weak from exhaustion. Something solid bumped against me. Marie's rowboat, somehow still intact. I hauled myself into it just as consciousness began to fade. The last thing I saw before blackness took me was the swamp returning to normal around me. The black water, receding, the twisted trees straightening, and somewhere, deep beneath the surface, a single point of blue-green light pulsing once, twice, then going dark. I grabbed my pack, the jar with Marie's mixture, and ran for my canoe. The black water was rising faster now, already covering the path I'd walked just minutes before. I pushed off from the dock just as water began spilling, over it. The sky had turned dark again, though there hadn't been more storms in the forecast. A heavy green-gray light hung over everything, making it hard to tell which direction I was headed. I pulled out my compass, but the needle spun wildly. Useless. I'd have to navigate by memory and instinct. "Hold on, Marie," I whispered, paddling. Hard. "I'm coming." I followed the direction I'd seen her small boat heading. The water grew thicker the farther I went, making each paddle stroke a struggle. Around me, the swamp was changing by the minute. Trees twisted and bent as I watched. Channels opened and closed like the swamp was breathing. A sound like distant thunder rolled across the water, but the sky above me was cloudless now. The thunder came again, and I realized it was coming from beneath me, from the water itself. Something bumped my canoe from below. Then again, harder. I gripped the sides as the craft rocked dangerously. A long, scaly form surfaced beside me, the biggest alligator I'd ever seen, at least 15 feet from snout to tail. Its eyes glowed with the same blue-green light as the entity's face. The gator swam alongside my canoe for a minute, watching me with those glowing eyes. Then it slipped beneath the surface again. I didn't feel relieved. I knew it was still down there, following me. I spotted Marie's rowboat, up ahead, empty and drifting. My heart sank as I paddled toward it. Had the entity gotten her? As I drew alongside the empty boat, I noticed something scrawled on the wooden seat in what looked like charcoal. Heart is at Black Island. Center pool, M. Black Island. I knew the place, an unnamed patch of land about half a mile further in, avoided by locals who claimed it was bad luck. I'd never seen anything there to worry about, but I hadn't been back in years. I tied Marie's boat to my canoe and kept going. The water around me was now completely black and thick as syrup. Things moved beneath the surface. Shapes I couldn't identify and didn't want to. Lightning flashed overhead, though there were no storm clouds. Just that strange green-gray light. In the brief brightness, I saw I wasn't alone on the water. Alligators swam in formation around me. Snakes slithered across the surface. Birds flew in tight circles overhead. All of them had those same glowing eyes. The pressure built in my ears again, and the voice of the entity filled my head. You bring poison to. Poison me. You cannot stop the cleansing. Where's Marie? I shouted into the air. What have you done with her? The Old One understands. She has joined with us. As you will. A shape rose from the water ahead. The entity, but larger now, towering 15 feet above the surface. Its body had changed, become more solid, more defined. The hollow, where its face should be now held dozens of glowing fungal growths, pulsing in patterns that made my vision blur. It raised an arm, and the water around my canoe surged upward, nearly capsizing me. I clutched the jar with the mixture, knowing I couldn't lose it. Black Island came into view behind the creature. A low hump of land covered in vegetation that seemed to move even without wind. At its center was a pool of water so dark it looked like a hole in the world. That had to be the heart, where Marie's journal said the entity's core would be found. But to reach it, I'd have to get past the Guardian itself. The creature brought both arms down, and a wave of black water washed over my canoe. I held on tight, but the force knocked me sideways. Water filled the craft, and it began to sink beneath me. I had seconds to decide. Clutching the jar in one hand and my pack in the other, I dove into the thick black water. The cold hit me first, a bone-deep chill that seemed impossible in the summer heat. Then came the pressure, like being squeezed from all sides. The water felt alive, probing at me, trying to get into my mouth and nose. I kicked hard toward Black Island, breaking the surface with a gasp. The entity roared, a sound like trees breaking and water rushing all at once. It began to move toward me, each step creating waves that pushed me back. I swam harder than I ever had, fighting against water that seemed determined to drown me. Images flashed through my mind. Tommy struggling in the water all those years ago, his hand reaching for mine, slipping away. Not this time, I grunted, forcing myself forward. My feet touched bottom and I staggered onto the shore of Black Island. The ground felt wrong beneath my boots, soft and yielding, almost like walking on flesh rather than earth. The entity emerged from the water behind me, no longer humanoid but a massive, shifting mass of vegetation, insects, and black water. It spread outward, surrounding the island, cutting off any escape. I ran toward the center of the island, following a path that seemed to form before me and disappear behind me. The trees leaned in as I passed, branches reaching for me like fingers. The center pool appeared ahead, a perfect circle of black water, still as glass despite the chaos around it. Below its surface, a pulsing mass of fungus glowed in shifting colors, lighting up the water from within. The heart of the entity. I uncapped the jar, ready to pour the mixture in, but as I knelt at the edge of the pool, the water erupted upward, forming into a shape I recognized. Marie stood before me, but not Marie as I knew her. Her body was semi-transparent, made of the same black water as the entity. Only her face looked solid, her eyes replaced with glowing fungal light. Leroy, she said, her voice somehow both hers and not hers. "You don't understand what you're doing. Marie, are you in there? Are you okay?" "I'm part of it now," she said. "Part of the cleansing. The swamp is fighting back against what's killing it. The chemicals, the pollution, it's too much this time. This thing is dangerous, Marie. It's changing everything, killing animals. To save the whole," she interrupted, "sometimes healing requires destruction first." Behind Marie, the main mass of the entity was approaching, absorbing trees and ground as it came. The island was shrinking. "The mixture," I said, holding up the jar. "Your grandmother's journal said it would calm the guardian." Marie's water face looked sad. "It will destroy it. Destroy its heart. And the swamp needs its guardian now more than ever." A deafening crack of thunder split the air. Real storm clouds had gathered overhead, black and heavy with rain. Lightning flashed, striking a tree at the edge of the island, setting it ablaze despite the dampness. Marie reached for me, her watery hand extending. "Join us, Leroy. Become part of the swamp you've protected all these years. Help us save it." For a moment I was tempted. To be part of something larger, to never be alone again, it pulled at something deep inside me. Then I thought of the abandoned research camp, the preserved animal bodies, the twisted trees. This wasn't protection, it was corruption. "I'm sorry." "Marie," I said, and lunged forward, dumping the mixture directly into the center pool. Marie's water form collapsed with a cry that sounded like heartbreak. The pool began to bubble violently, the fungal mass writhing beneath the surface. Lightning struck again, not a tree this time, but the pool itself. The electricity hit the mixture, creating a chemical reaction I hadn't expected. Blue flame erupted from the water's surface, spreading outward in a perfect circle. The entity shrieked, a sound that made my ears bleed and my vision go white with pain. The mass of it convulsed, sections breaking off and dissolving back into normal water and plant matter. I staggered backward as the blue fire spread across the island. The ground beneath me began to sink, the whole island collapsing in on itself. I turned and ran for the shore, jumping over fallen trees and bubbling pools of disintegrating plant matter. Behind me, a massive explosion of light and sound erupted from the center pool. The force of it knocked me forward onto my face. When I looked back, the heart pool was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of normal-looking water. The entity was breaking apart all around me, its massive form dissolving into separate components. Water returning to water, plants to plants, animals fleeing in all directions with their eyes no longer glowing. I reached the shore as the last solid ground of Black Island sank beneath the surface. With nowhere else to go, I dove into the water again. Normal water this time, though churning violently from the island's collapse. I swam blindly through the chaos, lungs burning, arms weak from exhaustion. Something solid bumped against me. Marie's rowboat, somehow still intact. I hauled myself into it just as consciousness began to fade. The last thing I saw before blackness took me was the swamp returning to normal around me. The black water, receding, the twisted trees straightening. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface, a single point of blue-green light pulsing once, twice, then going dark. The scream came from the rocks. I swear it did. Not from a person, not from an animal, but from the red stone itself. I froze on the narrow trail, my boots sending tiny pebbles tumbling into the abyss below. No one would believe me, but after 3 years in Grand Canyon National Park, I'd learned to trust what my senses told me. My name is Matthew Hayes. I used to be Professor Hayes, teaching geology to college kids who mostly just needed a science credit. That was before Emily died. Before the cancer ate away at her faster than the doctors said it would. Before I traded lecture halls for endless sky and classrooms for this vast, silent cathedral of stone. The canyon walls glowed red and orange in the late afternoon sun, like they were on fire from the inside. I took a deep breath of the dry air, catching the smell of juniper and sage. With tourist season over, I finally had the trails to myself again. "Beautiful evening, isn't it, Em?" I said out loud, my voice small against the massive walls rising around me. Talking to my dead wife had become a habit during my lonely patrols. Some of the other rangers thought I was cracking up. Maybe I was. I checked my watch, 5:17 p.m. The sun would set soon, and I was 8 miles from the nearest park building, on the tricky part of Hermit Trail where loose rocks make every step dangerous. I needed to pick up my pace. Weather reports mentioned a storm coming, unusual for this time of year. The radio at my hip crackled. "Hayes, check in. Over." It was Martinez from base. I pressed the talk button. "Hayes here, just past the second switchback on Hermit. All clear. Over." "Roger that. Be advised we're seeing that storm system moving faster than expected. Might want to consider heading back." "Over." I looked up at the sky. The clouds to the southwest were darker, moving in a way that seemed wrong. Not following the usual wind. "Patterns. I'll finish the route. Should be back before it hits. Over." "Your call. Just don't do anything stupid, Professor." Martinez always emphasized that last word, like it was an insult. 3 years here, and I was still an outsider to some of them. I touched the small turquoise pendant in my pocket. Emily's favorite. Tomorrow would be the 3rd anniversary of her death, and I planned to leave it at our special spot on the rim, where we'd watch the sunrise on our last visit before she got sick. The air suddenly went still. The typical canyon breezes that made the sparse bushes dance just stopped. Even the cry of a golden eagle overhead seemed to get swallowed by the rocks instead of echoing. Something felt off. That's when I noticed the holes. They were perfectly round, about the size of a quarter, drilled into the red sandstone. Except they didn't look drilled, more like melted. The edges were smooth, almost glassy. In my 3 years of patrolling this trail, I'd never seen anything like them. I pulled out my notebook, old habits die hard, and started sketching. As I reached to touch one of the holes, I realized something else was wrong. This area, usually, had signs of life everywhere. Lizard tracks, bird nests in the crevices, even the occasional snake. But everything was gone. No tracks in the dust, no droppings, no signs of life at all. Just silence and those perfect, impossible holes. I felt a drop in temperature so sudden that I could see my breath cloud in front of my face, despite the desert heat that had made me sweat through my uniform just minutes before. "That's not right," I whispered, zipping up my jacket. The radio crackled again, but this time, instead of Martinez's voice, there was only a strange clicking sound, like stones being knocked together underwater. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. Shook the radio, thinking it was malfunctioning, but the clicking continued in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. That's when I saw the strange, rust-colored liquid seeping from between rock layers ahead of me. It looked like iron oxide, the stuff that gives the canyon its red color, but flowing like water. I'd never seen that before either. I reached into my pack for a sample tube. As a geologist, my first instinct was always to collect, analyze, understand. I carefully caught some of the liquid and held it up to the fading light. It wasn't right. The consistency was wrong. Too thick, almost syrupy. And it was cold to the touch, much colder than it should have been. The ground beneath my feet trembled, slightly. Not a full earthquake, just a localized vibration, as if something massive was shifting its weight nearby. I capped the sample and turned to continue down the trail. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the dust behind me. Footprints exactly in my tracks, as if something had carefully stepped where I had stepped. But I hadn't passed anyone, and these impressions appeared deeper, heavier than mine should have been. Something was following me. something heavy, something careful. And that's when I heard the scream from the rocks again, louder this time, a sound that didn't come from a human throat or an animal's cry, but from the stone itself. The canyon wasn't just rock anymore. It was watching me, backed away from the footprints, heart pounding in my chest. My first thought was that another hiker had somehow gotten onto the trail behind me without my noticing. But deep down, I knew better. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small against the vast canyon walls. "Is anyone there?" Nothing but silence answered me. Not even the echo of my own voice came back. I pulled out my flashlight even though there was still daylight left. Something told me I shouldn't be here when darkness fell. The beam caught something glittering on the ground ahead, a water bottle and a hiking boot, partially hidden behind a rock. Someone's gear, left behind. I approached, carefully, and crouched down. The water bottle looked strange. Parts of it seemed melted, but not from heat. More like something had eaten away at the plastic. The boot was worse. The thick rubber sole had holes in it, and the leather upper was partly dissolved, like someone had spilled strong acid on it. "What could do this?" I whispered, poking the boot with my pen. The leather crumbled at my touch. My radio crackled again with that strange clicking sound. Louder now. Faster. Click, 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 click. I tried to call base again. "Martinez, come in. This is Hayes. I'm seeing some strange things out here. Over." Nothing but static and more clicking. I stood up and looked around. The sunlight was fading. Fast now, the shadows in the canyon growing longer and deeper. I took out my compass to double-check my direction back to the trailhead. The needle spun wildly, not settling on any direction. I tapped it with my finger. Still spinning. "That's impossible," I said to no one. The temperature dropped again, my breath fogging in front of my face. The storm clouds overhead seemed to bunch up directly above me, as if they were watching too. That's when I noticed something even stranger. As the shadows lengthened across the trail, I could see distinct impressions appearing in the sand behind me again. But I hadn't moved. It was as if something invisible was walking around me, leaving tracks in the dust. My hands began to shake. I'm a scientist. I look for logical explanations. But nothing logical explained what was happening. I turned back toward the trailhead. "Time to go," I muttered to myself. "Tell Martinez what you found and come back with backup tomorrow." That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another rock formation, a pillar of the red sandstone so common in the canyon. But as I watched, a piece of the canyon wall moved. No, not moved, unfolded. It was as if a section of the rock itself was opening up, stretching out limbs that shouldn't exist. The rock stood at least 9 feet tall when fully unfolded, its body the exact same color and texture as the canyon wall it had been part of seconds before. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My feet felt frozen to the ground as the thing turned toward me. Where a face should have been, it had what looked like crystals growing in a pattern. The crystals caught the dying sunlight and broke it into dazzling patterns that made my head hurt when I looked directly at them. My scientific mind tried desperately to catalog what I was seeing. 9 feet tall, multiple jointed limbs, exoskeleton, resembling the exact mineral composition of the surrounding stone. Some kind of crystalline sensory organ in place of eyes or a face. But the rest of my brain was screaming one simple thought. Run. I backed away slowly, not wanting to trigger a predator's chase instinct. The creature didn't move, but I felt something, a vibration in the air, in my chest, making me suddenly nauseous. Not a sound I could hear with my ears, but a feeling. It was communicating. I took another step back, and my foot slipped on loose shale. I fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. When I looked up, the creature was gone, vanished completely. but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I scrambled to my feet and started moving quickly back the way I had come. The first drops of rain hit my face as the storm finally broke. Lightning flashed, briefly lighting up the canyon in stark white light, and in that flash I saw dozens of shapes moving among the rock walls around me. All different sizes, but with the same crystalline faces, the same perfectly camouflaged bodies. Some were emerging from the very stone itself, unfolding like the first one. They were everywhere, and they were coming toward me. I ran, no longer caring about triggering any chase instinct. Rain began falling harder, making the trail slick and dangerous. One wrong step could send me over the edge, down hundreds of feet to the canyon floor. Lightning flashed again. They were closer now, moving with a fluid grace that shouldn't be possible for something so massive and apparently made of stone. I needed a place to hide, somewhere they couldn't follow. Up ahead, I remembered a narrow crack in the canyon wall, a small cave system I'd explored once during a geological survey. If these things were as big as they looked, they wouldn't be able to follow me in there. Thunder boomed overhead as I sprinted toward what might be my only chance at survival. Behind me, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a sound like stone grinding against stone. The creatures were moving faster now. They were hunting me. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, my boots slipping on the wet trail. The rain was coming down hard now, making rivers of the dusty path. Each flash of lightning showed the stone creatures getting closer, their crystal faces gleaming in the brief, harsh light. The cave entrance was just ahead, a narrow crack in the canyon wall that most hikers would walk right past. I'd only found it last year while documenting some unusual rock formations. Now, it might be the only thing that could save my life. I squeezed through the opening, the rough stone scraping my back as I pushed myself into the darkness. The passage was just wide enough for a person, but those 9-foot creatures with their multiple limbs would never fit through. Once inside, I clicked on my flashlight and moved deeper into the cave. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow tunnel that sloped downward. Water was already beginning to flow in from the entrance, making small streams at my feet. I needed to get to higher ground before this place flooded. The walls were smooth here, polished by water over thousands of years. My breathing echoed off them, sounding too loud in the enclosed space. I tried to calm down, to think clearly. "What are those things?" I whispered to myself, my voice shaking. As if in answer, I heard that grinding sound again, stone moving against stone, coming from the cave entrance. My flashlight beam shot back toward the opening, where something impossible was happening. The rock around the entrance was changing, melting. No, not melting, dissolving. The edges of the crack were widening as if some powerful acid was eating away at the stone. They were trying to get in. I backed away, moving deeper into the cave system. The tunnel branched into 2 paths. I chose the one heading upward, away from the water now ankle-deep at the entrance. As I climbed higher, my light caught something on the wall that made me stop. Paintings. Ancient paintings in red and white and black. Human figures with their arms raised toward shapes that looked disturbingly like what was chasing me. Tall figures with too many limbs and faces that were just geometric patterns. I recognized the style from my archaeological studies. Hopi. Native. People who had lived in this region for centuries before Europeans arrived. Below the paintings were symbols, a kind of writing I couldn't read, but the message seemed clear enough from the images. Tiny, human figures running, hiding, as the tall stone figures reached for them. They knew, I whispered, they knew these things were here. A low rumble of thunder shook the cave, sending small stones clattering down from the ceiling. The storm was getting worse, and somewhere behind me, those creatures were still trying to get in. I continued upward, the cave narrowing until I had to crouch to move forward. The air felt different here, colder with a sharp mineral smell that made my nose burn. My flashlight beam caught something ahead, a wider chamber where the cave opened up. I hurried toward it, hoping for a way out, or at least more room to maneuver. What I found instead stopped me cold. The chamber was roughly circular with a high domed ceiling, but what drew my eye was the center of the room. There, in a perfect circle on the floor, was a pool of that same rust-colored liquid I'd seen seeping from the canyon walls. It wasn't water. It wasn't blood. It moved on its own, rippling without any wind or disturbance to cause it. Around the pool, more ancient paintings covered the walls. They showed the stone creatures gathered around a similar pool, seeming to feed from it, worship it. I couldn't tell. The grinding noise grew louder. They were getting closer, dissolving their way through the cave system toward me. I backed away from the pool, wondering what to do next. The chamber had no other exits. I was trapped. My radio was still useless, producing nothing but that eerie clicking sound, now matched perfectly to the rhythm of the ripples in the pool. An idea struck me. I was a geologist. I knew rocks, minerals, chemical reactions. If these creatures were made of stone, or at least covered in it, maybe certain substances would affect them. I dumped out my backpack, searching for anything useful. Emergency flare, first aid kit, water bottles, granola bars. My testing kit, small bottles of chemicals for field analysis of minerals. Among them was a bottle of calcium carbonate solution and another of sulfur powder. Separately, harmless. Together, with the addition of water, the grinding sound was just outside the chamber now. I could see parts of the narrow tunnel beginning to widen as the creature's corrosive secretions ate through the stone. Working quickly, I mixed the calcium carbonate and sulfur with water from my bottle, creating a thick paste. It wouldn't be powerful, but it might be enough to distract them, to give me a chance. I also grabbed my emergency flare. The chemicals in it burned hot enough to trigger reactions in certain minerals. If these creatures really were what I thought, some kind of silicon-based life form, intense heat might affect them. A crystal face appeared in the widened tunnel entrance, refracting my flashlight beam into dazzling patterns. Behind it, more faces emerged, all focused on me. The largest creature pushed forward, its stone-like body scraping against the cave walls as it forced its way into the chamber. Up close, I could see more details. The way its limbs joined together, the strange texture of its skin that wasn't skin at all, but something like living rock. It reached for me with multiple jointed arms, and I stumbled backward, almost falling, into the rust-colored pool behind me. That's when I noticed something. The creature stopped when I moved closer to the pool, as if reluctant to approach it. Not scared, exactly, but respectful? The subsonic vibrations hit me again, stronger this time, making me double over with nausea. I felt pressure inside my head, patterns forming and dissolving, almost like words. Protector. Guardian. Hunger. Didn't hear these words. I felt them forming inside my mind as the creature communicated. Leave this place. The Ancient One awakens. I looked back at the pool, understanding slowly dawning. These creatures weren't the threat. They were protecting something else, something worse, something that was waking up deep in the canyon, and I had stumbled right into its feeding ground. I stood frozen between the stone guardians and the rippling pool of rust-colored liquid. My mind raced to make sense of what was happening. "What are you protecting?" I asked out loud, not sure if the creatures could understand human speech. "What's waking up?" The largest guardian extended a limb toward the pool, and the rippling liquid responded, moving like it was alive. The patterns became more organized, forming shapes that rose slightly from the surface. Another wave of those strange vibrations hit me, and more words formed in my mind. The Ancient One sleeps beneath. Your kind has cut too deep into the earth. You have disturbed its rest. I thought about the recent expansions to the tourist facilities in the canyon, new viewing platforms being built, Wider trails blasted into the rock. "We didn't know," I said, backing up against the wall. "We didn't mean to wake it." Outside, thunder boomed so loudly that small rocks fell from the cave ceiling. Water was pouring in now, creating streams that ran toward the pool. As the water touched the rust-colored liquid, it began to steam, giving off a smell like hot metal. The largest guardian moved closer to me, its crystal face inches from mine. The patterns were hypnotic, making my head spin. "You must leave this place. We cannot hold it back much longer." I nodded, then realized I had no idea how to get out. The way I came in was blocked by guardians, and there were no other exits from this chamber. "How?" I asked. "Show me the way out and I'll go." The creature moved back and the others shifted, opening a narrow path between them. They wanted me to go back the way I came, past them. I hesitated. Could I trust them? What if they were luring me into a trap? A violent tremor shook the cave, stronger than before. Not from the storm, from below, from beneath the pool. The rust-colored liquid splashed upward, forming a column that reached halfway to the ceiling before collapsing back. I didn't have much choice. I gathered my backpack, keeping the chemical mixture and flare ready in my hands. Then I carefully approached the opening between the guardians. They remained still as I passed, their crystal faces turned toward the pool. I could feel heat radiating from their stone bodies, like they were warming up from the inside. Just as I reached the tunnel entrance, another powerful tremor hit. This one knocked me off my feet, sending me crashing into the nearest guardian. Its surface was burning hot, and I cried out as my arm touched it. The creature reacted instantly, a limb whipping around toward me. I rolled away just in time as a stream of that corrosive liquid sprayed from a joint in its arm, hitting the cave floor where I'd been a second ago. The stone sizzled and dissolved. The guardians weren't trying to hurt me. They were just reacting to being touched. But that reaction could kill me just the same. I scrambled to my feet and hurried into the tunnel, hearing the grinding sound of the guardians moving behind me. The vibrations in my head became urgent, almost panicked. Run. Run now. It rises. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran through the narrow tunnel, ducking to avoid the low ceiling, splashing through water that was now knee-deep in places. The storm outside must have become a downpour, sending floods through the cave system. Behind me, a new sound rose above the grinding of stone, a deep, wet, sucking noise that made my skin crawl. Something huge was moving in that pool. The tunnel began sloping downward, taking me deeper into the cave instead of toward the exit. I hesitated, but water was flowing this way strongly, and I worried that going against the current would slow me down too much. My flashlight beam bounced off the wet walls, creating frightening shadows. The tunnel widened into another chamber, this one partially flooded. Water poured in from several openings high in the walls. I waded through, the water now at my waist, when I felt something brush against my leg. Not a fish or debris. Something solid but yielding, like flesh without bones. I aimed my flashlight down but saw only brown, churning water. Whatever had touched me was gone, but I moved faster, pushing through the water toward the far side of the chamber where I could see another tunnel. The grinding sound was closer now. The guardians were following me. No, not following. Fleeing. They were escaping whatever was waking up in that pool. I reached the tunnel and pulled myself out of the water, gasping from the effort. My clothes were soaked, weighing me down, and my left arm burned where it had touched the guardian. Looking back, I saw crystal faces emerging from the flood, the guardians moving with surprising speed through the water. Behind them, something else was moving, something huge that made the water bulge upward. The tunnel ahead split in two directions. I had no idea which way led out, but I could feel fresh air coming from the left passage. I took it, hope rising that I might find an exit. The sounds behind me grew fainter as I moved upward, the tunnel gradually becoming drier. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I saw it. A faint bluish light ahead. Not daylight, but maybe moonlight. The storm must have passed. I emerged onto a narrow ledge high on the canyon wall. Night had fallen, and the storm clouds were breaking up, letting moonlight shine through. Far below, I could see floodwaters rushing through the canyon floor. I collapsed on the ledge, breathing hard, my whole body shaking with exhaustion and fear. I'd made it out. Then I saw them. Dozens of guardians emerging from cracks and caves, all along the canyon walls. They were evacuating, climbing higher up the stone face with their multiple limbs. And from somewhere deep below came a sound that wasn't thunder, a roar that seemed to come from the earth itself, echoing off the canyon walls. The Ancient One was awake. I pressed myself against the canyon wall, trying to make myself as small as possible on the narrow ledge. The moon shone down, lighting up the canyon in silver and shadow. Below me, the floodwaters rushed through, carrying trees and debris. My radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. Hayes, do you copy? Over. It was Martinez, his voice full of worry. With shaking hands, I grabbed the radio. I'm here. I'm alive. Where are you? We've got search parties out looking. The storm hit hard and fast. I looked around, trying to figure out where I was. I'm on a ledge, high up. East wall, I think. I can see Plateau Point from here. Stay. Put, we'll come to you. Are you injured? I looked down at my left arm. Where it had touched the stone guardian, the skin was red and blistered, like a bad burn. It hurt, but it wasn't life-threatening. Just some burns. I'm okay. I paused, then added, Martinez, there's something in the canyon, something dangerous. What do you mean? Before I could answer, the ledge beneath me shuddered. A deep rumbling came from below, rising up through the stone itself. The entire canyon wall was vibrating. It's coming, I whispered, looking down. What's coming? Hayes, talk to me. The water in the canyon floor was changing. Areas of it were turning that same rust color I'd seen in the pool. But this was much bigger, spreading out like a giant stain across the water. Then the surface bulged upward, rising into a dome easily 50 feet across. The water ran off it, revealing something solid underneath, something dark and glistening in the moonlight. Oh my God, I breathed. The thing rising from the canyon floor was massive. Not stone like the Guardians, but something organic. A huge, glistening mass that reminded me of a giant amoeba or slug, but with structures that looked disturbingly like limbs and organs just beneath its surface. Hayes, what are you seeing? I couldn't find the words to explain. The Ancient One was beyond description, an organism that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist by any laws of biology I knew. All around the canyon, the Guardians were moving higher, climbing the walls with their multiple limbs. Some were disappearing into cracks and crevices, hiding from what was below. The Ancient One continued to rise, now towering 30 feet above the canyon floor. Parts of it glowed with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. It had no eyes that I could see, no face, but I felt it searching, sensing, hunting. And then I felt it, that same pressure in my head that I'd felt from the Guardians, but 100 times stronger. It crashed into my mind like a tidal wave, bringing, not words, but emotions, hunger, rage, ancient hatred. I clutched my head, almost falling off the ledge from the force of it. This thing had been sleeping for who knows how long, centuries, millennia maybe, and now it was awake, and it was angry. It's coming for me, I said into the radio, my voice barely a whisper. Who's coming? Hayes, you're not making sense. The Ancient One's body began to stretch, reaching upward toward the canyon walls. It moved like living mud or tar, flowing rather than walking. And it was coming straight toward where I was perched. I looked around desperately for a way to escape. The ledge continued around a bend in the canyon wall, but it was narrow and crumbling. Going back into the cave wasn't an option. I still had the chemical mixture I'd made and the emergency flare. Not much of a weapon against something that size, but it was all I had. The vibration in my head changed, becoming more focused, more directed. Images flashed in my mind. Humans cutting into the rock, building tourist platforms, blasting new trails. The Ancient One saw us as invaders, destroyers of its home. I thought about what I'd learned in the cave, the Hopi paintings warning about those who dwell within stone. They had known about these creatures. Had they known about the Ancient One too? As the massive being reached the base of the wall beneath me, I saw the stone guardians gathering on ledges and outcroppings nearby. They weren't running anymore. They were positioning themselves, surrounding the Ancient One. They really were protectors. Not of the Ancient One, but against it. They're trying to stop it, I said, understanding finally dawning. The guardians began to glow, heat radiating from their stone bodies. The Ancient One reached for them with pseudopods of glistening flesh, but wherever they touched a guardian, the flesh sizzled and pulled back. This was my chance. If the guardians were fighting it, maybe I could help them somehow. I uncapped the chemical mixture I'd made in the cave. It wasn't much, but maybe it would react with the Ancient One like it would with the guardians. I'm going to try something, I told Martinez. If I don't make it, tell them what happened here. Tell them to leave this part of the canyon alone. Hayes, don't do anything stupid. Wait for rescue. But I knew there was no time. The Ancient One was focused on the guardians now, but it would come for me next. I could feel its hunger, its rage. I climbed carefully to the edge of the ledge, the chemical mixture in one hand, the flare in the other. Below me, the Ancient One's massive body pulsed and writhed as it fought with the guardians. I lit the flare, its bright red light momentarily blinding me. Then I poured the chemical mixture onto the flare's burning end, creating a reaction that sent sparks flying. "Hey!" I shouted at the Ancient One. "Up here!" The creature's attention shifted, the pressure in my head becoming unbearable as it focused on me. A huge pseudopod rose up, reaching for the ledge where I stood. I waited until it was almost upon me, then threw the flare, chemical mixture and all, directly at the reaching flesh. The reaction was immediate and violent. Where the flare hit, the Ancient One's flesh bubbled and smoked. It let out a sound like no earthly creature I'd ever heard, a high-pitched wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The pseudopod whipped back, taking a chunk of the ledge with it. I lost my balance and fell, sliding down the steep canyon wall, grasping desperately for handholds. My left hand caught on a rocky outcrop, sending searing pain through my already burned arm. I hung there, dangling above the raging water and the wounded Ancient One below. The guardians moved with coordinated purpose now, surrounding the Ancient One, bombarding it with heat from their glowing bodies. Whatever these stone creatures were, they'd evolved to fight this thing. As I struggled to pull myself up, my hand slipped, and I felt myself falling. But instead of empty air, I landed on something solid, a stone platform that hadn't been there before. One of the guardians had positioned itself beneath me, creating a safe place to land. Its crystal face turned toward me, refracting moonlight, in patterns that somehow felt less threatening than before. The vibration in my head returned, gentler this time. You helped. You understood. Below us, the Ancient One was retreating, sinking back into the churning water. The guardians maintained their positions, still glowing with heat, driving it back down into the depths from which it had emerged. It sleeps again. For now, the guardian beneath me began moving, carrying me carefully along the canyon wall. He held on tightly as it climbed, eventually reaching a wide ledge where I could safely stand. In the distance, I could see flashlights moving, the search party coming for me. The guardian sensed them too and began to withdraw, its body already changing to match the surrounding stone. "Wait," I said. "What are you? How long have you been here?" The vibration returned one last time. "We are the first guardians. We were stone before we were alive. We will be here when your kind is gone." And then it was gone. melting back into the canyon wall so perfectly that I couldn't tell where rock ended and creature began. By the time the search party reached me, there was no sign of the Guardians or the Ancient One, just a flood-ravaged canyon and my wild story. Haze! Thank God! Martinez was the first to reach me, his flashlight beam blinding me momentarily. I looked at my left arm, expecting to see the burn from touching the Guardian. Instead, I saw something worse, or rather, nothing at all. Where my hand and part of my forearm should have been was now just empty space, the wound cauterized somehow, not even bleeding. My mind struggled to process what had happened. Had the Ancient One taken my hand? Had the Guardian's touch dissolved? "It completely. Your arm," Martinez gasped. I looked up at him, then back at the seemingly ordinary canyon walls around us. "You wouldn't believe what happened," I said. When I got back to the ranger station, I tried to tell my story about the Guardians, the Ancient One, the Hopi paintings warning about those who dwell within stone. Nobody believed me, of course. They blamed it on shock, trauma from losing my hand in a rock slide, but the National Park Service quietly shut down development in that section of the canyon. Too many unusual geological findings, they said. And sometimes, when I walk the rim alone at night, I think I see crystal faces watching me from the shadows. Not threatening, just observing, guarding. Emily's turquoise pendant is still out there, somewhere, lost in the flood. But somehow, I think she knows what happened, that I helped protect something ancient and powerful, something that needs to stay buried in the red earth of the canyon, because nothing that hungry should ever wake again. The sound of death has a way of staying with you. It's not like they show in movies, not always a scream or a cry. Sometimes it's just a crack, like a tree breaking in half. That's what I heard when the logging crane collapsed 2 years ago. Just a crack, then silence, then screaming. 2 men died under my watch that day. Their names were Mike and Trent, and not a day goes by that I don't hear that sound in my dreams. I'm Paul Erickson. I'm 48 years old, and I've run away to the edge of the world to escape that sound. But out here, in the deep woods of Minnesota's Superior National Forest, I'm finding there are worse sounds waiting. This morning started like any other. I woke, up in my cabin with frost on the inside of the windows. Late November brings the first real snow up here, turning everything quiet and white. Buck, my old retriever, was curled up at the foot of my bed. He used to be a search and rescue dog before. He got too old. Now he's just keeping a broken man company in the wilderness. "Come on, boy," I said, my breath making clouds in the cold air. "Let's check those trail markers." My fire tower sits 23 miles from the nearest ranger station. The forest. Service roads that lead here are barely roads at all. Just rough paths cut through endless pine trees. That's how I like it. After what happened at the logging site, I couldn't face people anymore. Out here, it's just me, Buck, and the forest. I limped across the room to start the coffee. My leg never healed right after the accident. The doctors said I was lucky to keep it, but sometimes the pain makes me wonder if lucky is the right word. While the coffee brewed, I pulled out my wallet and looked at the worn paper inside, the memorial service program for Mike and Trent. I've handled it so much over the years that it's nearly see-through now. After breakfast, Buck and I headed out. The morning was beautiful in that harsh way that only northern wilderness can be. The pines stood tall with their new coat of snow, and my boots crunched through the thin layer of white covering the ground. The air was so cold it burned my lungs, but it felt clean. Honest. I started checking the trail markers like I do every week. 20 years in the Forest Service taught me that trails save lives. People get lost out here and never come back, so I make sure the markers are visible, fixed in place, and pointing the right way. As I worked, the low winter sun barely cleared the treetops. Up here, even midday feels like evening in November. Long shadows stretched across the snow, turning, Simple trees into reaching giants. That's when I heard it. A branch breaking in the distance. Not the light snap a deer or fox might make. This was heavy, deliberate. "Buck," I called, but my dog was right beside me, suddenly alert with his ears. Perked up. I scanned the tree line, feeling the hairs rise on the back of my neck. That's when I saw it. A gray shape on the ridge above me. A wolf, watching me with unusual interest. Wolves typically avoid humans, but this one just stared, unmoving. Then, as if making a decision, it melted back into the trees. "Strange," I muttered to Buck, who pressed against my leg. That's when I noticed something else strange. The weather report I'd checked that morning warned of a blizzard coming in. Unusual for November, even this far north. The sky was still clear, but there was that feeling in the air, the heaviness that comes before a big storm. As we continued our rounds, I found myself looking over my shoulder more and more. Something felt wrong in the forest today. Something I couldn't name. I tried to shake it off as imagination, but after 20 years in the wilderness, I've learned to trust my gut. Book suddenly stopped walking and looked toward a thick stand of trees to our right. He whined, a sound I rarely heard from him. "What is it, boy?" I asked, following his gaze. The trees looked like any others, but something about them made me uneasy. They were just trees, I told myself. Just ordinary pines. So why couldn't I shake the feeling they were watching me? I pulled out my radio to check in with the main station. The thing crackled with static. "Fire Tower 7 to base. Daily check-in, over." More static than "Base to Tower 7, reading you. Storm's coming in faster than predicted, Paul. You might want to head back early, over." "Copy that," I replied. "Heading back soon, over and out." I put the radio away and looked at Buck. "What do you think? One more trail to check?" Buck wagged his tail, but his eyes kept drifting back to those trees. If only I'd listened to him then. If only I'd known what waited for us in the deepening shadows of the forest. I might have been able to save him. I might have been able to save myself. But I didn't know. So I patted my leg and said, "Come on, boy, let's finish up." And we walked deeper into the trees, toward what was waiting for us there. Little did I know, I wasn't walking into just another day in the forest. I was walking into a nightmare that had been waiting for me for a very long time. The next morning, I woke up with that feeling you get when something isn't right. You know the one. When your eyes pop open and your heart is already beating too, fast. Buck wasn't at the foot of my bed. Instead, he was at the window, his nose pressed against the glass, a low growl rumbling in his chest. I limped over to see what had him so worked up. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering everything in white. But that wasn't what caught my eye. There, in the clearing in front of my cabin, was a perfect circle where the trees bent inward, like they were all pointing to something in the middle. "That's not right," I whispered. "Trees don't bend like that naturally. Not all at the same time, and not in a perfect circle." I'd been in these woods for 2 decades and never seen anything like it. I got dressed quickly, my fingers fumbling with the buttons on my flannel shirt. The coffee sat forgotten as Buck and I headed outside to investigate. The snow crunched under my boots as I approached the circle. Up close, it was even stranger. The trees weren't just bent, they were twisted, like giant hands had grabbed them and wrung them like wet towels. Their trunks spiraled in ways that shouldn't be possible. Wood doesn't bend that way without breaking. "Come on, Buck," I said, stepping toward the center of the circle. But Buck wouldn't follow. He sat down firmly at the edge, whining and looking at me like I was crazy. "It's okay, boy," I tried to reassure him, but he just whined louder. This wasn't like him. Buck had never been afraid of anything in the forest before. He'd faced down bears without flinching. But now he was pulling back on his leash, desperate to get away from this place. Maybe I should have listened to him. I walked to the center of the circle alone, my heart thumping in my chest. The snow here had melted in a perfect circle, exposing the bare ground beneath, even though the temperature had been below freezing for days. The exposed earth felt warm under my hand, like something hot had been there recently. That's when I noticed the smell, like rotting leaves mixed with something metallic, like pennies or blood. I stood up quickly, suddenly wanting to be anywhere but there. "Let's go, Buck," I called, and he didn't need to be told twice. Later that day, as we were checking the North Trail, we found something worse. At first, I thought it was just a fallen branch in the path, but as we got closer, I realized it was a deer, or what was left of one. Its body was completely intact, not torn apart like a wolf or bear would do, but it was empty somehow, deflated like a balloon. When I looked closer, I could see small, neat punctures on its neck. All the blood was gone, but there was no blood on the snow around it. Buck wouldn't go near it. He barked from a distance, the fur on his back standing straight up. I've seen all kinds of animal deaths in my years as a ranger. I've seen what wolves do, what bears do, what mountain lions do. This wasn't like any of that. This was wrong. I tried my radio to report what I'd found, but all I got was static and strange noises that almost sounded like voices talking backward. I shook the radio, switched it off and on again, but the garbled sounds continued. "Coming. Find you. Cold ones." The words were barely understandable through the static, and they didn't sound like they were coming from the ranger station. I clicked the radio off, suddenly feeling very alone in the vast forest. As Buck and I headed back toward the cabin, the sun was already sinking low. The days are short this time of year, and I didn't want to be caught out after dark. Not today. Not with what I'd seen. That's when we spotted the tracks in the fresh snow. They were huge, 4 feet across if they were an inch, and deep, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. They weren't bear tracks. They weren't moose tracks. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen before. "What do you make of that, Buck?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the quiet forest. He just whined and pressed against my leg. The tracks led off into the densest part of the forest, an area I rarely patrolled because it was so thick with underbrush and fallen trees. Something told me not to follow them, and for once I listened to that voice in my head. Back at the cabin, I tried the radio again. This time, I got through to the main station. "This is Fire Tower 7 to base. Come in," I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. After a moment of static, a familiar voice came through. "Base to Tower 7. We read you, Paul. Everything okay up there?" I almost told them. Almost shared what I'd found. The twisted trees, the bloodless deer, the massive tracks. But what would I say? That I was spooked by some strange tracks and a dead animal? They'd think I was losing it. "Yeah, just checking in," I said instead. "Any update on that storm?" "It's a big one, Paul. Might want to prepare for a few days on your own up there. Could hit tomorrow night." "Copy that," I replied. "I'll be ready." After I signed off, I pulled out my journal. I'd been keeping track of strange things I'd seen in the woods. Not in the official logs, but in my own notebook. Lately, the pages had been filling up faster. The twisted trees weren't the first odd thing I'd noticed. Last week, I'd found claw marks on trees 15 feet off the ground, higher than any bear could reach, and my compass had been acting funny, near certain rock formations that weren't on any of my maps. As I wrote down the day's findings, Buck paced by the door, restless. When I finally went to bed, he didn't take his usual spot at my feet. Instead, he stayed by the door all night, alert and watchful, as if he expected something to try to get in. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the cabin in the wind sounded like footsteps on the porch. Every gust whistling through the cracks seemed to carry whispers. And when I did drift off, I dreamed of trees that moved when you weren't looking, and massive shadows circling my cabin, drawing closer with each pass. I woke up just before dawn, covered in sweat despite the cold. Buck was growling at the window, the sound low and dangerous in his throat. Outside, fresh snow had fallen again, and there, in the pristine white blanket, was a set of those massive tracks, circling my cabin, stopping right under each window, as if something huge had been looking in at me while I slept. The storm was coming, and I was starting to think the weather might be the least of my worries. The day of the storm started quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds had gone silent, like they knew something bad was coming. I tried not to look at the tracks around my cabin, as Buck and I set out for our morning patrol. The snow was coming down harder now, fat flakes that stuck to my eyelashes and melted down my face like cold tears. "Stay close," I told Buck, but I didn't need to. He hadn't left my side since we woke up. I needed to check the east trail markers before the storm hit. If anyone got caught out in the blizzard, those markers might be the only thing guiding them to safety. I knew it wasn't likely anyone would be this deep in the forest with a storm coming, but I had a job to do. We were about 2 miles out when Buck suddenly stopped. His ears perked up, and he stared into the thick trees to our left. I stopped too, listening. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, I caught the sound of someone calling for help. "Hello?" the voice called. "Is anyone there? Please help me." It sounded like a woman, her voice high with fear. My first thought was relief. Just a lost hiker, nothing supernatural. My second thought was worry. What was someone doing out here so far from any trail, with a blizzard on the way? "Buck, come on," I said, turning toward the voice. But Buck wouldn't move. He growled, deep in his throat, staring at the spot where the voice was coming from. "Hello?" the voice called again. "I can hear you. Please help." Something wasn't right. Buck had been a search and rescue dog. He should be pulling me toward someone in trouble, not backing away. "Hello?" I called back. "Stay where you are. I'm coming to help." I took a step forward, and Buck barked sharply as if warning me. That's when I noticed something odd about the voice. It was calling from between 2 large pines about 50 yards away. But then, without any rustling or movement, the same voice called from a spot 100 yards to the right. "Help me! I'm over here!" No one could move that fast without making noise, especially through thick underbrush and snow. "Who's there?" I called, my hand moving to the hunting knife on my belt. I don't usually carry my rifle on regular patrols, but now I wished I had it. Instead of an answer, I heard a new sound. The exact call of a chickadee, a small bird common in these woods. But it was coming from the same spot as the woman's voice. Had been. Then it changed to a perfect imitation of a wolf's howl. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. No human could make those sounds, and no animal I knew could mimic a human voice. "Let's go, Buck," I said quietly, backing away slowly. We turned and walked quickly back the way we had come. I tried not to run. Something told me that running would be a bad idea, like it might trigger a chase. We were almost back to the main trail when I saw it. Between the trees ahead stood something tall. At first, my mind tried to make it a moose or a bear standing on its hind legs. But even the biggest bear isn't 9 feet tall, and bears don't stand perfectly still, watching you with eyes that reflect no light. It was covered in dark, shaggy fur, except for its face. Its face was almost human, but wrong. The features stretched and twisted, like someone had tried to make a person's face but didn't quite know how they were supposed to look. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Me, Buck, and this thing. I couldn't move. My feet felt frozen to the ground. Buck was trembling against my leg, making a whimpering sound I'd never heard before. Then it moved. 1 second it was 50 yards away, the next it was 30, without seeming to cross. The space between. It just was suddenly closer, like a video that skipped a few frames. That broke my trance. I turned and ran, no longer caring if running was a bad idea. Buck was right beside me, matching my pace despite his old legs. I glanced back once. The creature was simply watching us flee, its head tilted to one side like a curious dog. Then, it opened its mouth, too wide, impossibly wide, and made the sound of the woman calling for help again. We ran all the way back to the cabin. I slammed the door behind us and grabbed my rifle from the wall rack, my hands shaking so bad I could barely load it. "It's okay," I told Buck, though we both knew it wasn't. "We're safe in here." I spent the rest of the day checking the locks on the doors and windows, pulling the curtains closed, and trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I'd seen. Maybe it was stress. Maybe after 2 years alone out here, my mind was playing tricks. On me. But Buck had seen it too. And Buck was still standing by the window growling at the edge of the trees. As the day wore on, the snow fell heavier and the wind picked up. The blizzard was arriving ahead of schedule, just like the rangers had warned. Soon, the view from my windows was nothing but white, swirling snow. In a way, it was a relief. If I couldn't see the forest, I couldn't see what might be out there. Watching. Night fell early, as it does this time of year. I kept the fire going in the wood stove, but the cabin still felt cold. Buck refused to leave his post by the window, even when I called him to eat. It was around midnight when I heard it, a scratching at the door. Soft at first, then harder, more insistent. Buck was instantly alert, his hackles raised, growling. Low. "Who's there?" I called, rifle in hand. The scratching stopped. Then, from right outside the door, I heard my own voice call back. "Who's there?" It mimicked, the words slightly wrong, like someone learning to speak. My blood ran cold. I'd never told anyone about the strange animal I'd seen. Who would believe me? But hearing it speak with my own voice made it impossible to deny what was happening. "Go away," I shouted, trying to sound brave. "Go away," it repeated, the words garbled but recognizable. Then the scratching moved to a window, then another, then back to the door. It was circling the cabin, testing each entrance. I checked the locks again, my hands shaking. The wind howled outside, or maybe it wasn't the wind. Maybe it was that thing, calling with voices it had stolen. Around 3 a.m., things got quiet. Too quiet. Even the storm seemed to pause. Buck suddenly lifted his head and whined, looking toward the door. I raised my rifle, expecting the scratching to start again. Instead, I heard a familiar bark outside. It sounded exactly like Buck. But Buck was right here beside me. He looked at me, then at the door, confused by the sound of his own bark coming from outside. "Don't," I whispered, but it was too late. Buck ran to the door, barking back at what he thought might be another dog. The sound outside changed, becoming a perfect imitation of Buck's excited bark when he wants to play. My dog barked louder, pawing at the door. "Buck! No!" I lunged for his collar, but I was too slow. Somehow, I still don't know how, the door opened. Maybe I hadn't latched it properly in my fear. Maybe the thing outside had figured out how to work the handle. All I know is one moment the door was closed and the next it was swinging open, letting in a swirl of snow and wind. Buck shot through the opening like a bullet, barking and growling. "Buck!" I screamed, running after him. Outside was a wall of white. The blizzard was in full force now, the wind cutting through my clothes like knives. I could barely see a few feet in front of me. "Buck!" I called again, desperate. "Come back!" I heard barking to my right and stumbled that way, my feet sinking deep in the fresh snow. The cold bit at my face and hands. I hadn't grabbed my coat and the freezing air burned in my lungs. The barking stopped. Then I heard Buck yelp, a sound of surprise and pain that cut off suddenly. "Buck!" I screamed, running faster, no longer caring about the cold or the thing in the woods. All that mattered was reaching my dog. I broke through a line of trees into a small clearing. The snow was falling so thick I could barely see, but there was enough moonlight filtering through the clouds to make out a dark shape standing in the center of the clearing. It was the creature, still and silent. At its feet lay a small dark form in the snow. "Buck." "No," I whispered, raising my rifle. "Get away from him." The creature looked at me with those two human eyes. It didn't move as I approached, rifle aimed at its chest. It just watched, its breath making clouds in the cold air, same as mine. When, I was about 20 feet away. I fired. The sound of the shot was swallowed by the howling wind. The creature didn't flinch, didn't move. It was as if the bullet had passed right through it. I fired again, and again. Still, it stood there, unharmed. I was close enough now to see Buck clearly. He wasn't moving. His body was arranged in a strange way, legs carefully positioned like. He was being displayed. There was no blood, just like the deer we'd found. Grief and rage filled me. I charged forward, no longer thinking clearly. I just wanted to hurt the thing that had hurt my dog. The creature finally moved. One moment it was standing over Buck, the next it was gone, simply vanished into the swirling snow. I reached Buck's side and fell to my knees. He was gone. The warmth was already leaving his body, faster than it should in normal circumstances. The snow around him wasn't melting, as if all the heat had been drawn out of him at once. I gathered his body in my arms, tears freezing on my face as I carried him back toward the cabin. The creature was nowhere to be seen, but I could feel it, watching me from somewhere in the white wall of the blizzard. When I reached the cabin, I realized how cold I was. My fingers were numb, my face burning with the first stages of frostbite. I had to get inside or I'd die out here just like Buck. Managed to get through the door and close it behind me. I set Buck's body gently on his bed by the fire, though I knew it was too late for warmth to help him now. As I moved to lock the door, I noticed strange frost patterns forming on the inside of the windows. Not the normal ice crystals, but deliberate shapes, almost like writing in a language I couldn't read. The temperature in the cabin was dropping rapidly, my breath visible in the air despite the fire blazing in the wood stove. It was as if something was pulling the heat right out of the room, something that wanted me as cold and lifeless as my dog. I added more wood to the fire and wrapped myself in every blanket I could find. The storm raged outside, and somewhere in that storm was a creature that could mimic voices, move faster than sight, and was completely unharmed by bullets. And it wanted in. Morning came, but you wouldn't know it. The blizzard turned day into night, wrapping my cabin in a world of white. The wind screamed against the walls, finding every crack and whistling through, but I knew some of those sounds weren't the wind. I hadn't slept. How could I? Buck's body lay by the fire, growing stiffer by the hour. My grief turned to anger, then to a cold kind of focus. I needed to survive. I needed to understand what this thing was so I could fight it. The radio was useless now, just static and those strange backward-sounding voices. I was completely cut off. My cabin didn't feel safe anymore. Those frost patterns on the windows were growing, spreading like living things across the glass. The fire in the wood stove would flare up, then die down to almost nothing, even when I added more wood. Something was playing with the temperature, making it hard for me to stay warm. The scratching had started again around dawn, moving from window to window, door to door. But now there seemed to be more than one source. Scratches would come from the front door and the back window at the same time. Think, Paul, I said to myself, trying to stay calm. What do you know about this thing? It could mimic voices and animal sounds. It moved incredibly fast. Bullets didn't hurt it. It seemed to control cold somehow, freezing its victims. And now it seemed like it could be in more than one place at once. That's when I remembered the fire tower. My cabin sits at the base of a hill. At the top is the actual fire tower, a metal structure rising above the trees with an observation deck and a small room at the top. I don't use it much in winter since there's not much risk of forest fires in the snow, but it was made of metal, not wood like my cabin. It had supplies, emergency equipment, and most importantly, it was designed to be a safe place during emergencies. I needed to get there before this thing broke into the cabin. I had maybe 100 yards of open ground to cross, then up the hill through the trees, and finally the ladder to the tower platform. In normal weather, it would take 5 minutes. In this blizzard, with that thing out there, it would be the longest journey of my life. I dressed in every layer I had: thermal underwear, flannel shirt, sweater, snow pants, heavy coat. I filled my pockets with matches, my hunting knife, and a small first aid kit. I found my headlamp and strapped it on. Then I grabbed my rifle, even though I knew bullets wouldn't stop the creature. It was comfort more than protection. I took one last look at Buck. "I'm sorry, old friend," I whispered. Part of me wanted to carry him with me, but I knew I needed to move fast and light. By the door, I took a deep breath, then threw it open and ran. The cold hit me like a wall. The snow was already up to my knees, making each step a struggle. The wind threatened to knock me over. My headlamp barely cut through the swirling white. I was halfway to the trees when I heard it. That woman's voice calling for help, this time from somewhere to my left. "Help me, I'm over here." I didn't look. I kept moving, then Buck's bark came from my right. "Keep going," I told myself. "That's not Buck. Buck is gone." I reached the trees and started up the hill. Here, the snow wasn't as deep, but roots and rocks hidden under the white made every step dangerous. One wrong move, and I'd break an ankle. Out here, that would mean death. Shadow moved between the trees ahead, then another to my side. The creature was all around me, watching, playing with me like a cat with a mouse. "What do you want?" I shouted into the storm. My own voice answered back from the darkness. "What do you want?" I kept climbing. The metal structure of the fire tower appeared through the trees, a ghost in the white. Just another 100 feet, then up the ladder, then safety. Maybe. I was almost there when the scratching started again, right behind me. Close. Too close. I turned, rifle raised. Nothing but swirling snow. Then something touched my shoulder. I spun around, swinging my rifle like a club. It connected with something solid, and I heard a sound like breaking ice. For just a second, the air cleared, and I saw the creature, or rather, creatures. There were 3 of them now, smaller than the one I'd seen before, each about the size of a large dog with the same dark fur and distorted faces. They moved together, circling me. Where the rifle had hit one, there was a crack in its form, like broken glass, with a blue glow showing through. The wind rose to a howl, driving ice crystals into my face like needles. I couldn't see the creatures anymore, but I could hear them, moving around me, their steps crunching in the snow. I ran the last distance to the tower, my lungs burning in the cold air. The metal ladder was slick with ice, but I didn't care. I climbed as fast as I could, the rifle banging against my back. Below me, I heard the creatures reach the base of the tower. One started up the ladder after me. I reached the trap door to the observation deck and pushed through, slamming it shut behind me. There was a lock, just a simple slide bolt, but I fastened it anyway. The observation room was small, maybe 15 feet square, with windows on all sides to watch for fires. A small wood stove sat in one corner with a stack of wood beside it. There were emergency supplies in cabinets, first aid kits, some canned food, bottles of water, flares, and firefighting equipment. I went straight to the wood stove and started a fire with shaking hands. The room was freezing, but the metal walls at least blocked the wind. Something hit the trap door from below. Once, twice, then a constant pounding. The bolt held, but I didn't know for how long. I needed a plan. The rifle wouldn't stop these things. The storm meant no help was coming. I was on my own. As I warmed my hands by the small fire, I noticed a book on the desk, an old, leather-bound journal. Curious, I picked it up. The first entry was dated June 17, 1932. "Found something strange in the North Woods today," it read. "Trees twisted in a circle. Rangers think it's a windstorm, but no other damage nearby. Something doesn't feel right." I flipped through the pages. The writer, a ranger named Thomas Fuller, described encounters just like mine. Strange animal. Deaths, unexplained tracks, cold spots, and finally sightings of what he called the winter walkers. My heart pounded as I read his final entries, written during another record-breaking winter storm. They hate fire and bright light, he wrote. Not regular light like lanterns, but the bright flash of magnesium flares seems to hurt them. They're made of cold somehow. Heat and bright light make them weak. The pounding at the trap door grew louder. The bolt was bending. I looked at the emergency supplies again. Flares. And something else. The fire suppression system had containers of chemicals, designed to put out forest fires. The main ingredient was a powder that, when it hit flames, produced an intensely bright white light. I had an idea. Working quickly, I grabbed several flares and the canisters of firefighting chemicals. I positioned them around the room, ready to use. I found a flashlight with fresh batteries and put it in my pocket, just in time. With a final bang, the bolt broke and the trapdoor flew open. One of the smaller creatures pulled itself into the room, moving in that strange, jerky way, like a video with missing frames, its eyes fixed on me, hungry, cold eyes. I grabbed a flare, struck it, and thrust it toward the creature. The bright red light made it hiss and back away, but it didn't retreat back through the trap door. Two more crawled in behind it. They spread out, circling me again, staying just out of reach of the flare's light. Then something larger started to come through the opening. The main creature, the one I'd seen in the forest. As it pulled itself up, the three smaller ones moved toward it, melting into its form like drops of water rejoining a puddle. It grew larger with each one it absorbed. Now it was just me and the original creature, face to face in the small metal room. "What are you?" I asked, holding the flare out like a weapon. It tilted its head, studying me. Then it spoke, using a mix of voices I'd heard before. Mine. Buck's bark, the woman's cries. "Cold ones," it said. "Hungry." It took a step toward me. I backed up against the wood stove, feeling its heat against my legs. The creature noticed my movement and looked at the fire with what seemed like fear. It stayed back, unwilling to get too close to the heat. "You killed my dog," I said, anger making my voice steady. "Food," it replied simply. "Cold makes food last." I realized with horror what it meant. It wasn't killing for sport. It was preserving its victims, freezing them to eat later. It lunged suddenly, moving so fast I barely had time to react. I swung the flare, catching it across what passed for its face. It screeched, a sound like ice breaking on a lake, and backed away. But the flare was dying, its light growing dimmer. I had maybe seconds before it went out completely. The creature knew it too. It waited, patient, just beyond the fading circle of light. As the flare sputtered out, I threw it at the creature and dove for the fire suppression canister. In one motion, I twisted the top to activate it and tossed it into the fire in the wood stove. For a second, nothing happened. The creature moved toward me, its mouth opening impossibly wide to reveal rows of teeth like icicles. Then the chemical hit the flames. The flash was blinding, a burst of white light brighter than the sun. I closed my eyes and covered my face, but still saw the glow through my eyelids. The creature screamed. Not like anything human or animal, a high, sharp sound that made my teeth hurt and the windows vibrate. When I opened my eyes, spots dancing. In my vision, I saw the creature backing away. Where the light had hit it directly, its form was crystallizing, turning to something like clear ice. It moved slower now, jerky and uncoordinated. I didn't waste the opportunity. I grabbed another canister, activated it, and threw it directly at the creature. It burst open, covering the thing in white powder that ignited in a second blinding flash. More of the creature crystallized. Cracks appeared across its surface. It tried to change form, to separate into smaller entities again, but the process seemed stuck halfway. It made one last lunge for me, moving with desperate speed. Its clawed hand caught my leg, tearing through snow pants and skin alike. Pain shot up my calf as ice-cold fingers dug into muscle. I fell, my leg pinned under the weight of the half-frozen creature. Cold spread from its touch, numbing my leg instantly. I could feel the warmth, the life, being pulled out of me just like it had been pulled from Buck. With my free hand, I grabbed the flashlight from my pocket, turned it on, and shoved it directly into the creature's face. It wasn't as bright as the flares or chemicals, but at such close range it was enough to make the thing loosen its grip slightly. I reached for my hunting knife and plunged it into one of the cracks in the creature's crystallized surface. The knife stuck there, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the crack spread. Like hitting just the right spot on a frozen lake, the surface of the creature began to splinter in all directions. The cold blue glow from inside grew brighter as more. Cracks appeared. With a sound like a glacier calving, pieces of the creature began to fall away. Each piece that hit the floor shattered like glass. I pulled myself backward, dragging my injured leg, trying to get away from the disintegrating monster. The creature made one final sound, not a mimic this time, but something ancient and angry and afraid. Then it collapsed entirely, breaking apart into hundreds of crystalline shards that scattered across the metal floor of the observation room. For a long moment, I just sat there, breathing hard, waiting to see if the pieces would reform. They didn't. The blue glow faded from them until they looked like nothing more than bits of dirty ice, already starting to melt in the heat from the wood stove. My leg was in bad shape. Where the creature had grabbed me, the flesh was pale white with frostbite. I couldn't feel anything below my knee, and that scared me more than the creature had. Outside, the storm still raged, but somehow it seemed less fierce now, as if the creature had been feeding it somehow, making it stronger and colder. I managed to pull myself to the first aid cabinet and found bandages for my leg. As I worked, I glanced at the melting remains of the creature. Already they were nothing but puddles of dirty water. Had I truly destroyed it? Or just this one manifestation? The old journal suggested these winter walkers had been in these woods for a long time. Maybe they were always here, sleeping until the conditions were right: deep cold, isolation, fear. I looked at my leg again. The frostbite was severe. Even if I survived the storm, I might lose the limb. But I was alive. I had figured out how to fight these things. Light, heat, find the cracks and make them bigger. As the storm began to ease outside, I made a decision. If I survived, I wouldn't stay silent like the ranger in 1932 had. People needed to know what was out here in the deep woods. They needed to know about the cold ones, the things that waited for blizzards and darkness to hunt. I picked up the old journal and added my own account on its blank final pages. They hate light, I wrote. They feed on cold and fear, and they're still out there, waiting for the next storm. The storm finally broke 2 days later. I stayed in the fire tower, keeping the wood stove burning hot and my flashlight close. Every few hours, I'd check the puddles where the creature had melted. They remained just water, dirty and strange-smelling, but just water. My leg got worse. The frostbite went deep, and no matter how I tried to warm it, the skin stayed white and dead. I couldn't feel my foot at all. By the second day, I knew I was in serious trouble. When the sky finally cleared, I tried the radio again. To my surprise, it worked. Fire Tower 7. To base, emergency, over. I called, my voice rough from lack of water. Static, then, base to Fire Tower 7. We read. You, Paul, are you all right? We've been trying to reach you for days. I need immediate medical evacuation, I said. Severe frostbite and... I paused, wondering how much to say. And animal attack. Roger that. Rescue team is being dispatched now. Weather's clear enough for helicopter. Should reach you in 2 hours. Can you hang on? Yes, I said. I'll be here. I signed off and looked out at the bright, sunny day. The snow sparkled like diamonds. beautiful and innocent now that the storm had passed. No sign remained of the nightmare I'd lived through, except my injured leg and the melted puddles on the floor. And the journal. I tucked Thomas Fuller's old journal into my coat. People needed to know. The rescue helicopter arrived exactly when they said it would. The paramedics were shocked at the state of my leg, wrapping it carefully before loading me into the helicopter. One of them, a young woman named Sarah, asked what happened. I almost told her everything, but looking at her concerned, professional face, I knew how it would sound. A monster that mimics voices, creatures made of cold that eat the heat from living things. I'd sound crazy. Got caught in the storm, I said instead. Leg got frostbitten, might have fallen in the tower too, hit my head. Everything's a bit fuzzy. She nodded, looking relieved to have a simple explanation. As the helicopter lifted off, I looked down at the forest falling away below us. Somewhere, down there was my cabin and Buck's body. I'd have to come back for him, give him a proper burial. That's what he deserved after all these years together. At the hospital in Duluth, the doctors took one look at my leg and shook their heads. The frostbite was too severe, the tissue already dead. They would have to amputate below the knee. I wasn't surprised. In a way, I'd known since the creature grabbed me. This would be my reminder, my permanent connection to what happened in those woods. During my recovery, I had visitors. My old boss from the Forest Service came first, concerned and full of questions about what happened. I stuck to my simple story: caught in the storm, bad frostbite, confusion from hypothermia. He nodded, but I could tell he suspected there was more. "We found some strange things at your cabin, Paul," he said. "The rangers who went to check on you said there were weird marks all around the building. And inside—" He hesitated. "Inside, they found Buck. I'm sorry." I closed my eyes, grief washing over me again. "How was he?" I asked, though I already knew. "Frozen solid. But the strange thing is, he wasn't just dead. He was arranged, Paul. Positioned like he was on display. You know anything about that?" I shook my head. "Like I said, everything's fuzzy. Storm hit, I made for the tower, leg got bad. Don't remember much else." He didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. Later, when I was alone, I pulled out Fuller's journal from where I'd hidden it in my hospital bag. I read through it again, this time more carefully. Fuller had done research on the Winter Walkers before his final encounter with them. He'd found old Ojibwe legends about cold spirits that walked in winter storms, stealing the warmth from living things to feed their endless hunger. The legends said they appeared when the balance of the forest was disturbed, when too many trees were cut, when the natural cycle was broken. That made me think. The logging operation that had gone wrong 2 years ago, where Mike and Trent died, it had been part of a controversial expansion into previously protected forest. We'd been cutting down trees that had stood for hundreds of years. Had we woken? Something disturbed? Something that should have been left sleeping? I remembered finding papers in my cabin once. Old government documents about chemical testing in the area during the 1950s. Defoliants, chemicals to kill plants, had been tested in remote parts of the forest. Could those chemicals, those poisons, have changed things in ways we didn't understand? A week after my surgery, another visitor came, a man in a crisp suit who introduced himself as Dr. Alan Mercer from the Environmental Research Division. I'd never heard of it. "Mr. Erickson," he said, sitting beside my bed, "I'd like to talk to you about what happened during the storm." "Not much to tell," I started, but he held up his hand. "Please, we know about the tracks around your cabin. The temperature anomalies, the unusual formations in the snow, and we know about the journal you took from the fire tower." I stared at him. "How?" "The ranger who found you radioed in about the journal. Said you were clutching it like your life depended on it." He leaned forward. "We'd like to see it." I hesitated, then reached for my bag and handed him the journal. He flipped through it, nodding as if confirming something he already knew. "Have you told anyone else about what's in here?" About what you saw? No, I admitted. Who'd believe me? He smiled slightly. More people than you might think, Mr. Erickson. These phenomena have been reported before, not just in 1932. There have been incidents in 1879, 1904, 1955, and now 2023. Always during unusual winter storms, always in areas where the forest has been disturbed. What are they? I asked. He closed the journal. Officially, they don't exist. The incidents will be attributed to weather conditions, wildlife behavior altered by habitat changes, and in your case, hypothermia-induced hallucinations. But unofficially, he studied me for a long moment. Unofficially, Mr. Erickson, there are things in this world that science is still trying to understand, things that exist at the edges of what we know. You encountered one of them. Will they come back? I asked. Probably, eventually, when conditions are right. He stood up, tucking the journal into his briefcase. But thanks to you and Thomas, Fuller, and the others who've survived encounters, we know more about them now. How to fight them, how to survive them. You're taking the journal, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, but we'll give you a copy, if you'd like. Your account is valuable. After he left, I lay back in my hospital bed, staring out the window at the winter sky. My leg, what was left of it, ached with phantom pain. The doctors said that was normal. Amputees often felt pain in limbs that weren't there anymore. In a way, that's how I felt about the whole experience. Like something had been cut away from my understanding of the world, but I could still feel it, still sense the edges where reality used to be different. 2 months later, I was released from the hospital with a prosthetic leg and a job offer. Not back at my old fire tower, I couldn't manage that anymore, but at the Forest Service headquarters in Duluth, teaching wilderness survival to new rangers. On my first day, I found a package on my desk. Inside was a copy of Fuller's journal, including my own editions and a note. The truth is out there in the woods. Some will believe it, some won't. But the woods remember, and so do we. Stay warm, Paul. Dr. M. I still dream about those days in the blizzard. I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear scratching at my window, or Buck barking from somewhere, far away. And on snowy nights, when the wind blows hard against my windows, I turn all the lights on in my apartment and sit close to the heater. Just in case. Because the cold ones are still out there, waiting in the deep woods, waiting for the next storm, the next person alone in the wilderness, waiting to feed on their warmth, their fear, their life. And if you ever find yourself in the northern woods in winter and hear a voice calling for help from between the trees, or see tracks too big for any animal you know, don't follow, don't investigate. Run, find light, find heat, and pray the cold ones aren't hungry enough to follow. I wasn't always alone. I wasn't always broken. 3 years ago, I had a family, a wife with laughing eyes and a daughter who thought I hung the moon. 3 years ago, I was Dr. Victor Novak, respected forensic anthropologist with a corner office at the university. 3 years ago, I still believed in a world that made sense. That was before the fire. I was working late that night. Bones don't identify themselves when my phone rang. By the time I made it home, there was nothing left but ash and char. The firefighters told me it was quick. They told me neither Laura nor Emma felt much pain. They told me there was nothing I could have done. They lied. Now I'm just Victor, Ranger Novak to the few people I still talk to, patrolling the vast maze of lakes and forests in Minnesota's boundary waters. It's 1977, and out here, no one asks about your past. No one notices when you don't smile. No one expects you to be whole. This morning, like every morning, I push my wooden canoe into the glass-smooth water just as the sun breaks over the pines. Mist hovers above the lake, thick enough to touch. The haunting cry of a loon, that mournful, wavering call, echoes across the water. It sounds like something lost, something mourning. I know that feeling well. My paddle dips silently as I glide through the water. 30 miles of wilderness separates me from the nearest ranger station. That's exactly how I like it. But something feels wrong today. The birds near the eastern shore went quiet as I passed. Not the gradual quiet of noticing a human, but a sudden, unnatural silence, like someone flipped a switch. The small fish that usually jump at dawn, creating ripples across the still water, are nowhere to be seen. And the mist, it's moving wrong. Mist should drift with the breeze. But this morning, it seems to curl and flow against the wind, reaching out in tendrils across the lake surface. I pause, letting my canoe drift, and pull out my worn notebook. For 18 months now, I've been documenting odd occurrences in my section of the wilderness. Little things that don't add up. Things the other rangers laugh off when I mention them. The professor's at it again, they say. Still trying to solve the mysteries of the universe. They don't understand that when you've studied death as long as I have, you develop a sense for when things aren't right. And nothing has felt right. For months now. I reach into the waterproof pocket of my pack, fingers brushing against Emma's small stuffed fox. The fur is matted now, dirty from being carried everywhere, but I can't leave it behind. It's all I have left of her. This week would have been her 10th birthday. Ahead, a bull moose stands in the shallows, water dripping from its massive antlers as it watches me. Our eyes meet across the distance. Then, suddenly, it bolts, crashing, through the underbrush, abandoning its breakfast without reason. I've never seen a moose move with such panic. Dark clouds roll in from the north, fast and unnatural. The weather report promised clear skies all week. Something is gathering. I check my watch. I need to complete my circuit along the Canadian border, checking the remote campsites and portage trails. I paddle harder, trying to outrace the approaching storm. The day stretches before me. Hours of solitude in a wilderness that suddenly feels like it's watching my every move. I've packed specialized equipment today. Bone saws, collection jars, measuring tools. Not standard ranger gear, but necessary for the research no one has authorized me to conduct, because something is happening in these woods. Something that's been happening for longer than anyone realizes, and I'm going to find out what it is, even if it kills me. Little did I know how close to the truth that thought would be. The first thing I found was a rabbit, or what was left of a rabbit. It lay on the shoreline of a small island, looking almost normal at first glance. The fur was intact. No blood, no bite marks. But when I knelt beside it, I saw the truth. The rabbit was empty, like a stuffed toy with the stuffing pulled out. The skin and fur remained, but inside where bones should be, there was nothing. The flesh had collapsed in on itself, forming a sad, flat shape on the rocky shore. I'd seen a lot of dead animals in my years as a ranger. Bears take bites, wolves tear and rip. But I'd never seen anything like this. A creature with its entire skeleton removed, leaving everything else behind. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves and gently turned the rabbit over. No cuts, no holes, no way for the bones to have been taken out. It was as if they'd simply disappeared. I took photos and samples, bagging the poor creature for further study. My hands shook a little as I wrote in my field notebook. This wasn't natural. This wasn't possible. It wasn't the last one I would find. Over the next week, I discovered more animals in the same condition. A fox, 3 squirrels, a young deer, all empty of bones, all arranged in strange patterns that couldn't be accidental. The squirrels formed a perfect triangle. The fox was positioned with its tail curled in a perfect spiral. Something was hunting in my wilderness. Something that wanted bones. I paddled to the central island cluster where my compass started acting strange. The needle spun wildly when I pointed it toward the largest island, spinning in circles like it couldn't make up its mind which way was north. The temperature dropped too. I've spent enough winters up here to know cold, but this was different. Spots of air that were 15 degrees, colder than they should be, moving around like invisible clouds. I'd paddle through one and feel an instant chill, like swimming through a cold current in a warm lake. Then I saw the trees. On the north side of the largest island, a stand of white pines had been changed. The bark had been removed in perfect, geometric patterns, squares, triangles, and shapes I didn't have names for. The exposed wood underneath was bleached white, like bone left in the sun. As I ran my fingers over the strange patterns, my radio crackled to life. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Return to base camp immediately. All personnel must evacuate. The voice was scratchy, distant, and clearly not talking to me. I recognized the formal tone of old Conservation Corps communications, the kind they used back in the 1930s. "Hello?" I called into the radio. "This is Ranger Novak. Who's transmitting?" Nothing but static answered me. I checked the frequency. It was the standard Ranger channel. No one should be broadcasting old messages on it. I made camp that night on a small island half a mile from the strange trees. I didn't want to be too close to that place when darkness fell. As the sun set, something even stranger happened. The forest went completely silent, not just quiet, silent. No leaves rustling, no waves lapping at the shore, no insects buzzing. For exactly 7 minutes, the world around me made no sound at all. I could see the wind moving through the treetops, but I couldn't hear it. I clapped my hands. Nothing. I shouted. Nothing. I couldn't even hear my own voice. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the silence ended. The normal sounds of the forest rushed back in, so loud after the eerie quiet that I covered my ears. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I found footprints along the muddy shore near my camp. They weren't animal tracks. They looked almost human, but too long, too narrow. And they made no sense. Each set of prints started suddenly, continued for a few steps, then stopped. As if something had appeared out of nowhere, walked a short distance, then vanished. The loons were silent that morning. So were the wolves. Even the insects seemed subdued. The whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I paddled to another island, this one with a small beach. The normally clear water around it had turned cloudy, filled with tiny white particles that drifted like snow underwater. I filled a sample bottle and held it up to the light. Bone. Thousands of tiny fragments of bone, floating in the water. As I knelt there, staring at my sample, I noticed something on the rock face behind me. Markings that hadn't been there before. I'd been to this island dozens of times and knew every inch of it. Yet now the smooth rock face was covered with carvings. Pictures of tall, stick-like figures pulling something from smaller human shapes. The carvings looked ancient. The lines, weathered and old. But they hadn't been there yesterday. I was sure of it. I touched one of the figures, tracing the strange, elongated limbs. Something cold settled in my stomach. I'd been a scientist long enough to trust evidence, and everything I was seeing pointed to one impossible conclusion. I wasn't alone in these woods. Something was out there, something that shouldn't exist. And I had a terrible feeling it knew I was looking for it. I saw it through the morning fog. I was paddling back to check on the strange carvings when the mist rolled in. Thick, white, and unnatural. It wasn't normal fog. It moved with purpose, swirling around my canoe like curious fingers. That's when a shape appeared in the whiteness ahead. At first, I thought it was a dead tree, one of those lightning-struck pines that stand like skeletons among the living. Forest. But then it moved. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, and thin as a sapling. Its limbs were too long, hanging almost to where feet should be. Those limbs bent in ways arms shouldn't bend, with extra joints that folded like an insect's legs. It was white, not pale, not cream-colored, but white like polished bone. I stopped paddling. My canoe drifted silently as I stared. The thing stood at the water's edge, half hidden in fog. Symbols covered its surface, the same strange markings I'd seen on those rock carvings. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "Who's there?" The sound died as soon as it left my mouth. Around the figure, the air seemed to swallow all noise. Even the gentle lapping of water against my canoe went silent when the waves got close to where it stood. The thing turned toward me, not with a head, because it didn't really have one, but with its whole body. It didn't walk. It glided, hovering just above the ground, moving toward the water's edge. I grabbed my camera. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the button, but I managed to snap 3 photos before the creature stopped. It stood there, watching me, though I couldn't see any eyes. I felt it studying me the way I'd studied those boneless animals, like I was a specimen. Then it simply came apart. Its long limbs separated from its body, floating away like white sticks in the air. The pieces moved independently, drifting in different directions before vanishing into the fog. I sat there, frozen in my canoe, for a long time after it disappeared. When I finally pulled myself together, I paddled to shore where the creature had stood. There were no footprints, no marks, in the dirt, nothing to prove it had been there at all. That night, I developed the photos in the small darkroom I'd built in my cabin. As the images appeared in the chemical bath, my heart sank. Where the creature should have been, there was nothing but fog and trees. But something else showed in the photos. Something I hadn't seen with my naked eye. White branch-like structures stretching toward the camera, toward me. I couldn't sleep. I sat on my cabin porch, rifle across my knees, watching the dark woods. Until dawn. The next day, I returned to the islands. I had to know more. I found more clues. In an abandoned limestone quarry on the eastern shore, the rocks had been harvested. Chunks missing, like someone had taken bites out of the calcium-rich stone. Nearby, an old hunter's cabin stood with its door swinging open. Inside, a collection of deer antlers that once hung on the walls were now dust, crumbled to nothing like they'd aged 100 years overnight. I was making notes about this when I spotted it again. This time, there was no fog to hide it. The bone creature stood at the tree line, watching me. In the daylight, I could see more details. How its surface wasn't smooth but covered with tiny ridges and patterns. How it seemed to blend with the white birch trees behind it, becoming almost invisible when it didn't move. "What are you?" I called out. Again, my words died in the silent bubble around it. The creature tilted its body, a gesture almost like curiosity. Then it raised one long limb and pointed. Not at me. At the biggest island in the central cluster. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. That island had always seemed off somehow. Too quiet, too still. Now I knew why. That's where it wanted me to go. That's where answers waited. But I wasn't that easy to lure. I turned my canoe in the opposite direction and paddled hard for the nearest shoreline. As I did, the wind picked up suddenly, pushing me back toward the island. The water, calm moments before, churned with small, angry waves that splashed into my canoe. When I looked behind me, I saw not one but 3 of the bone creatures standing. Along the shore I was trying to reach. They were blocking my escape route. They were hurting me. Rain began to fall as the sky darkened with storm clouds that hadn't been there minutes earlier. The wind grew stronger, the waves higher. My canoe rocked dangerously. Lightning flashed, and in that brief, blinding light, I saw what waited ahead. The central island loomed, its trees bent like grasping hands. and along its shore stood dozens of the bone creatures, all perfectly still, all watching me struggle against the storm they had somehow called. I had two choices: capsize in the growing waves or paddle to the island they wanted me to reach. As the storm grew worse, I made my decision. I turned my canoe and let the wind carry me toward the waiting island, toward the creatures made of bone. Lightning flashed again as my canoe scraped onto the rocky shore. The bone things parted silently, forming a path that led into the dark heart of the island. I grabbed my pack, my rifle, and Emma's stuffed fox. If I was going to face whatever waited in those woods, I wouldn't go without the one thing that reminded me I'd once been loved. "All right," I said to the silent creatures as rain poured down around us. "Show me what you want me to see." They didn't speak. They didn't need to. As I walked between their still forms, one thought filled my mind. I might be walking to my death. The path through the trees was dark even though it was midday. The storm clouds above blocked out the sun, and the pines grew so close together that their branches wove into a ceiling over my head. Rain dripped through in places, cold drops hitting my face as I walked. The bone creatures led me deeper into the island. They didn't make a sound. Their feet, if you could call them feet, never seemed to touch the ground. They just glided forward, those two long limbs sometimes bending backward as they moved. I kept my rifle ready, though deep down I knew bullets probably wouldn't hurt things made of bone. After walking for about 20 minutes, we reached a clearing that shouldn't have been possible. The island wasn't big enough to hide a space this large, yet here it was, a perfectly circular area maybe 100 feet across. What filled that clearing made my blood run cold. Cabins. Ranger cabins from different times, all gathered in one place. I recognized the modern design of a cabin built in the 60s sitting right next to an old log structure that must have been from the early 1900s. Next to that stood a canvas tent with wooden supports like the Conservation Corps used in the 30s. "This isn't possible," I whispered. One of the bone creatures turned toward me, its body language suggesting I should explore further. I approached the nearest cabin cautiously. The door hung from one hinge, swinging slightly in the breeze. The windows were dark. Inside, dust covered everything, but I could tell someone had lived here recently, maybe in the last year or two. Coffee cups sat on a small table. A jacket hung by the door. On the desk, a ranger's logbook lay open. I picked it up and read the last entry. May 18th, 1975. Something's wrong with the island. I keep seeing things in the trees, white things. No one believes me. I'm going to get proof tomorrow. There was no next entry. I moved to the next cabin, the older log one. Inside, I found another journal, this one leather-bound and aged. The handwriting was faded but clear. June 4th, 1937. Third man missing this month. Found strange markings on trees. Animals behaving oddly. Request immediate evacuation of all Corps members. And on a separate page, something that made my skin crawl. They come in cycles, every 40 years, 1897, 1937. When will they return? What do they want with our bones? I sat on the dusty bed, my mind racing. 40-year cycles. If they came in 1937 and again in 1977, that meant they were here now. They were active right now. A noise from outside made me jump. The bone creatures were moving around the clearing, seeming agitated. The storm was getting worse, wind howling through the trees and rain now coming. Down in sheets, I grabbed both journals and moved to the third structure, the tent. Inside, I found old equipment, rusted tools, rotting canvas bags, and a map pinned to a wooden board. It showed the island chain, but with markings I didn't understand. Circles around certain islands, lines connecting them, and in the center, where I now stood, a symbol like a spiral that matched the carvings on the bone creatures. As I studied the map, my boot hit something solid under the rotting canvas floor. I knelt down and pulled back the fabric. Bones. Human bones. Lots of them. I've seen enough human remains in my career to know these belong to at least 5 different people. And they weren't arranged randomly. They formed a pattern, a circle, with strange symbols inside. I backed out of the tent, my heart pounding. In the clearing, the bone creatures had gone still again, all facing the center of the island, all facing the same direction. Something was happening. The ground beneath my feet didn't feel right. It felt hollow. I stamped my foot, and the sound confirmed it. There was a space underneath. Rain poured down as I made my way to the center of the clearing. The bone creatures didn't try to stop me. If anything, they seemed to be waiting for me to discover something. In the very middle of the clearing stood a stone. Not a natural boulder, but a shaped stone about waist-high with a flat top. Carved into its surface was that same spiral symbol. I pushed against the stone. It didn't budge. I tried turning it, and to my surprise, it rotated easily, like it was meant to be turned. As it spun, a grinding noise came from beneath my feet. The ground began to sink. Not the whole clearing, just a circle about 20 feet across with me at the center of it. The bone creatures stayed at the edge, watching as I descended into darkness. I grabbed my flashlight as the rain disappeared. Above me, the light revealed a chamber underneath the island, a space that shouldn't exist. The walls weren't made of dirt or rock. They were made of bones. Thousands, maybe millions of bones from every kind of creature imaginable. They were fused together, larger bones making up the main structure, smaller ones filling the gaps. Animal skulls, human rib cages, deer antlers, all merged into a terrible kind of architecture. As my platform stopped its descent, I stood in a massive underground chamber. The ceiling had to be 30 feet high, the space stretching out farther than my flashlight could reach. In the center of this bone cathedral stood something like an altar, a raised platform made of stacked human skulls, all facing outward. On top of it sat a book. Not a journal this time, but an actual book, old, bound in what looked like leather but wasn't. The cover was white, like everything else in this place. With shaking hands, I opened it. The pages were thin, almost translucent. The writing wasn't, in English or any language I recognized. But scattered throughout were drawings, diagrams showing the bone creatures collecting skeletons from humans and animals, bringing them to the island. One page showed the island itself, but as a living thing, a massive organism that fed on calcium and bone. The creatures weren't separate beings. They were parts of it, like fingers on a hand, sent out to gather what it needed. And according to the dates marked clearly throughout the book, it woke up to feed every 40 years. For centuries. As I turned the final page, I found a map of the entire Boundary Waters. Marked in red were dozens of spots where people had gone missing over the decades. Some of the names I recognized from old ranger stories, hikers never found, canoeists who vanished without a trace. All of them taken by the bone harvesters. A shadow fell across the book. I looked up. One of the bone creatures stood on the other side of the altar. But it was different now. Its chest was opening, a vertical crack appearing down its middle. The crack widened, revealing what was inside. Tiny skeletons. Hundreds of them, fused together like a terrible mosaic. Human-shaped but small, each one frozen in a position of pain. The creature reached toward me with one impossible limb. I knew then what the island wanted. It wanted to add my bones to its collection. I ran. There wasn't time to think. The bone creatures. Chest was open, those tiny fused skeletons reaching for me with hundreds of little hands. I knocked over the altar, sending the book flying, and sprinted into the darkness. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I ran, lighting up walls made of Countless bones. I had no idea where I was going, just away from that thing behind me. More bone creatures appeared from side tunnels. 5, 10, maybe more. All moving with that same jerky, insect-like motion. All coming for me. I skidded to a stop at a fork, in the tunnel. My mind raced. Left or right? I'd studied human skeletons my whole career, learning every weakness, every breaking point. Could that help me now? I turned and aimed my flashlight directly at the nearest creature. In that bright beam, I could see its structure clearly. The way its joints connected, the thinner sections where stress would cause breaks. It wasn't invincible. It was still made of bone. And bone can break. I grabbed a metal rod that jutted from the wall, an old mining tool left behind by someone who never made it out. As the creature reached for me, I swung the rod at its knee joint. Crack! The sound echoed through the tunnel as the creature's leg shattered. It didn't make a sound. No cry of pain, no angry shout. But it dropped to the ground, trying to pull itself forward with its arms. The others kept coming. I turned and ran down the right tunnel, looking for a way out, a way up. There had to be another exit. The tunnel sloped downward. Not good. I needed to go up, to get back to the surface. But as I rounded a corner, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. The tunnel opened into an enormous cavern, far bigger than the first, and in its center was a pit, a massive hole at least 50 feet across. The edges of the pit were lined with millions of bones, all pointing inward like teeth. From the pit came a glow, a soft, pulsing light that reminded me of a heartbeat. I crept closer, keeping to the shadows. The bone creatures were gathering. Around the pit, all facing inward, like they were watching something, or worshiping it. As I got closer, I could see into the pit. What I saw will haunt me until the day I die. It was alive. The entire pit was one enormous organism, a mass of twisted bone and sinew that pulsed and moved. It had no clear shape, no face, but somehow I knew it could sense me. This was the island, the real island. Everything above was just camouflage. The bone creatures weren't separate beings. They were its fingers, its tools. It sent them out every 40 years to harvest bones, to bring back calcium and other minerals it needed to grow, and it had been doing this for centuries. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, the ground shook. The bone creatures turned as one, their bodies all pointing toward me. I'd been discovered. I backed away, but there was nowhere to run. Bone creatures blocked every exit. The pit thing pulsed faster, more urgently. The whole cavern trembled. Then, I remembered my pack. Every ranger carries emergency supplies, flares, first aid kit, and fire starter. I also had a small can of boat fuel I'd been carrying to refill my camp stove. As the bone creatures closed in, I had a desperate idea. I pulled out 3 emergency flares and the fuel can. With shaking hands, I poured fuel on the nearest bone wall, then made a trail of it leading to the pit's edge. The creatures were just feet away now, their long limbs reaching for me. I struck the first flare and threw it at the fuel-soaked wall. Whoosh! The flames caught instantly, racing along the bone walls. The bone creatures jerked back, confused by the fire. I struck another flare and threw it directly into the pit. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a sound filled the cavern, a high, piercing shriek that wasn't made by anything human. The pit creature was screaming. The bone creatures began to move erratically, some breaking apart, others crashing into each other. The fire spread quickly, feeding on whatever held the bones together. The whole island was shaking now. Pieces of the ceiling, skulls and femurs and ribs, rained down around me. I had to get out, fast. I spotted a narrow tunnel on the far side of the cavern, sloping upward. As the fire raged behind me, I ran for it, dodging falling bones and confused creatures. The tunnel was tight, barely big enough for me to crawl through. I scraped my elbows and knees raw as I clawed my way upward, the sounds of chaos echoing below. After what felt like hours, I saw light ahead. Natural light. The storm had broken, and moonlight filtered through an opening. I burst out onto the shore of the island, gasping for fresh air. Behind me, the ground was sinking, trees tilting as their roots lost their hold. The whole island was collapsing in on itself. My canoe was still there, miraculously undamaged. I shoved it into the water and jumped in, paddling harder than I ever had in my life. I was 100 yards offshore when the island disappeared. Not dramatically, not with a big explosion. It simply sank, pulled down into the depths of the lake by the dying thing beneath it. Waves rippled outward, rocking my canoe, but soon the water was calm again. Where the island had been, there was nothing but open water reflecting the moon. I made it back to my cabin just as dawn broke. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My clothes were torn, my body covered in cuts and bruises. But I was alive. As I emptied my pack, something fell out that I didn't recognize. A small object about the size of my palm. It was a perfectly formed miniature human skeleton, made not of bone, but of some clear, crystal material. When I touched it, it hummed softly, vibrating with a frequency I could feel in my teeth. I should have thrown it in the lake. I should have burned it. But I didn't. I kept it. I reported the incident, of course, told my supervisors everything. They sent a team to investigate, but they found nothing. No sunken island, no bone creatures, no underground chambers. Just a natural depression in the lake bed where the island used to be. They said there must have been a landslide. Said the isolation was getting to me. Said I needed a psychiatric evaluation. 2 weeks later, I was placed on administrative leave. 2 months later, I was committed to Lakeside Psychiatric Hospital, diagnosed with acute stress disorder with hallucinatory elements. That was 3 months ago. They don't let me have much here, but I managed to keep Emma's stuffed fox. And hidden inside it, wrapped in cloth, is that crystal skeleton. Sometimes at night, it glows, casting strange shadows on my walls. The doctors say I'll be released soon, once I admit that what I saw wasn't real. They want me to say it was all in my mind, brought on by grief and isolation. But I know what I saw. I know what's out there, and I know when it will be back. 1977, plus 40 years, is 2017. Not so far away, really. Someone needs to be ready when the bone harvest begins again. The scream came from nowhere. 1 second I was alone in the peaceful morning fog of the Smoky Mountains, and the next, a high, terrified shriek cut through the air, then stopped suddenly. Just like that. No fading, no sobbing afterward, just silence. My name is Abigail Morris, and I've been a park ranger here for 15 years. I know these mountains better than I know the lines on my own face, and I know when something isn't right. That scream wasn't right. I stood frozen on the trail, my breath making little clouds in the cold morning air. The fog was thick today, wrapping around the ancient trees like white fingers. Sunlight tried to break through in places, making beams of light that looked almost solid enough to touch. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted. "Park Ranger, is anyone there?" Nothing answered except a mountain stream bubbling somewhere, to my left. Usually the forest would be full of noise by now, birds singing, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling, but today it felt wrong. Too quiet in some places, like the forest was holding its breath. I checked my watch. 7:15 a.m. I had started my patrol at dawn, heading through Cades Cove, a good 15 miles from where any other rangers would be working today. The radio on my belt gave a burst of static, making me jump. "Get it together, Abby," I muttered to myself, adjusting the heavy pack on my shoulders. I had a job to do. 3 different hiking groups had gone missing in the park over the last month. Park management was blaming it on inexperienced hikers, getting lost, bad weather, maybe even bears. But I knew better. Something wasn't adding up. A family of deer appeared at the edge of the trail, their ears twitching nervously. They stared at me, then suddenly turned and bounded away, white tails flashing. They weren't running from me. They were running from something behind me. I spun around, hand moving to the bear spray on my belt. Nothing was there, just swirling mist that seemed to move a little too purposefully. The trail ahead led deeper into the valley, winding through old-growth forest that had stood here for centuries. My boots slipped slightly on the stone path, which was strangely slick. The moisture in the air was unusual, even for the Smokies, where we get our name from the natural fog that often hugs the mountains. As I walked further, the forest grew quieter. Even my footsteps sounded muffled, like I was walking on carpet instead of rocky trail. The fog should have burned off by now, but instead, it seemed to be getting thicker. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by anything human, but by the forest itself, or something in it. A twig snapped somewhere off the trail. I stopped again, listening hard. Is someone there? I called again. The mist swirled, and for just a second, I thought I saw a shape in it, tall and thin, with long arms and no face. Then the fog shifted, and it was gone. I told myself it was just my imagination. The worry about the missing hikers was getting to me. The anniversary of my sister's disappearance was coming up too, which never helped my nerves. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be a normal patrol. I took out my compass to check my heading, and my blood went cold. The needle was spinning wildly, around and around, never settling. That wasn't possible. Unless... I dropped the compass back into my pocket and picked up my pace. I needed to find those missing hikers before whatever was out there found me. First, the thing about these mountains is they get inside you. They become part of who you are. For me, they're beautiful and terrifying all at once. 20 years ago, when I was 18, my little sister Emma disappeared on these same trails. We were hiking together, just a normal day trip we'd done a dozen times. I stopped to tie my shoe, and when I looked up, she was gone. Just like that. No scream, no sign of struggle. The search parties found nothing, not even a footprint. That's why I became a ranger. I never wanted another family to go through what mine did. I never wanted anyone else to feel that hollow ache that never really goes away. My hand moved to the breast pocket of my uniform where I kept Emma's photo. It was worn at the edges now, but her smile was still the same, bright and full of life. She'd be 35 now, if she were still alive. Sometimes I imagine what she'd look like, what she'd be doing. But mostly, I just miss her. I'm still looking for answers, Em. I whispered to the photo before tucking it away. Being one of the first female rangers in the park wasn't easy. Most of the guys thought I wouldn't last a year. They made bets about how quickly I'd quit. But I showed them. Year after year, I outperformed most of them in training. I learned every plant, animal, and trail in the park. I could predict weather changes before the meteorologists. And most importantly, I found people. Lost hikers, wandering children, injured climbers. I found them when no one else could. But I never found Emma. A drop of water hit my cheek, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked up expecting rain, but the sky directly above was clear where the fog had thinned. The drop was ice cold against my skin. The sense of wrongness grew stronger as I continued down the trail. The forest felt like it was watching, waiting. The path had begun to loop strangely. I was following a straight trail according to my map, but somehow I'd passed the same lightning-struck oak tree 3 times. I stopped and pulled out my radio. "Ranger Morris to base, come in." Static hissed back at me, then a garbled voice that didn't belong to any of my colleagues. "Help us. Can't find the way out. They're in the mist." My skin prickled. That message wasn't coming from base, and it didn't sound like it was happening now. It had the tinny quality of a recording. I tried again. This is Ranger Abigail. Morris requesting radio check, over. More static, then a different voice. Abby, come find me. I've been waiting. I nearly dropped the radio. That voice, it couldn't be. It sounded exactly like Emma. Who is this? I demanded, my hand shaking. Identify yourself. Nothing but dead air responded. The radio had gone completely silent. I clipped it back to my belt, trying to calm my racing heart. I was imagining things. The stress of the search, the anniversary, the strange fog, it was all getting to me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just tried to communicate with me, something that knew exactly how to get under my skin. I pulled out my father's hunting knife, the one he'd given me before he died. Always carry it, he'd said. The mountains aren't always kind. How right he'd been. Ahead of me, the mist seemed to part slightly, revealing a small clearing. In the center lay a backpack, not old and weathered, but new, recently abandoned. I approached it carefully, scanning the area for any sign of its owner. When I was sure I was alone, I knelt and unzipped it. Inside was standard hiking gear, water, bottle, energy bars, first aid kit, and a small leather-bound journal. I hesitated, then opened it to the last entry. The handwriting started neat, but grew increasingly frantic. Day 3. Something's wrong with the fog here. It moves against the wind. I keep seeing shapes in it. Tall, thin figures just at the edge of my vision. When I turn to look directly at them, they're gone. Day 4. The others think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. There are watchers in the mist. They're following us. Sometimes I hear them whispering, but I can't make out the words. Day 5. We're lost. Compass doesn't work. GPS is dead. The mist is everywhere now. The others went looking for help this morning. They haven't come back. I'm alone, but not really alone. They're still watching. They're coming closer. If anyone finds this, stay away from the mist. They live in it. They are it. They take people. The entry stopped mid-sentence. A chill ran down my spine as I looked up at the swirling fog all around me. Was it closer now? It seemed denser, moving with purpose toward the clearing. I quickly packed the journal and stood up. Whatever had happened to the owner of this backpack, I needed to find them, and the other missing hikers, fast. But first, I had to figure out what was happening in these mountains, and how it might be connected to what happened to Emma all those years ago. I gripped my knife tighter and stepped back onto the trail, deeper into the valley where the mist seemed thickest. If there were answers to be found, they'd be there, and so would the danger. The further I hiked, the stranger things became. First were the footprints. Normal hiking boot treads that started in the middle of muddy patches and then stopped abruptly, as if the people wearing them had simply vanished mid-step. I found 5 different sets, all showing the same impossible pattern. Then came the silence. Not just quiet, but a complete absence of sound. I snapped my fingers next to my ear and could barely hear it, like the air itself was swallowing the noise. No birds called. No insects buzzed. Even the constant background whisper of wind in leaves had died. The silence pressed against my ears until they ached. But the trees were the most disturbing. Old-growth pines and oaks, some over 100 years. Old, with strange symbols carved into their bark. Not random scratches or initials left by disrespectful hikers. These were precise geometric patterns, triangles inside circles, spirals that seemed to move if you looked at them too long, and lines arranged in ways that hurt my eyes. "What the hell?" I muttered, tracing one pattern with my finger. The carving was fresh, the sap still sticky. Suddenly, the air around me turned freezing. not gradually cooling but instantly dropping 20 degrees. I could see my breath clouding heavily and the skin on my arms pebbled with goosebumps. 3 steps later, I was back in normal temperature again, like I'd walked through an invisible cold spot. My radio crackled to life on its own. "Day 6 in the search area," came a man's voice. "No sign of the Cooper family yet. Moving to grid." Section 4. I recognized that voice, Ranger Peterson. But that search had happened 2 weeks ago. The radio was picking up old transmissions somehow. It crackled again. "I can see their tent, about 50 yards east of Klingman's Creek. Wait, there's something wrong." Static hissed, then. "The tent's empty. Looks like they left in a hurry. Food's still on plates, but there's something." The transmission cut off abruptly. I'd never heard this part of Peterson's report. According to the official record, he'd found nothing that day. I grabbed my radio. "Peterson, this is Morris. Come in." Nothing but static answered me. I'd been walking for hours now, following the trail deeper into the valley. According to my map, I should be approaching Whisper Creek, but nothing looked familiar. Even worse, I realized I'd been here before, earlier today. I was walking in circles despite following a straight path. Ahead, the mist cleared briefly, revealing a perfect circle of dead vegetation about 15 feet across. Every plant inside the circle, ferns, wildflowers, saplings, was brown and withered, as if all the life had been sucked out of them in an instant. Outside the circle, everything was lush and green. I knelt at the edge, careful not to touch anything inside the dead zone. The soil looked drained of color, too, pale and dry compared to the rich black earth just inches away. My digital watch beeped. Low battery. That was impossible. I'd put in a fresh battery yesterday. My flashlight flickered when I tested it, and my phone showed only 12% battery despite being fully charged this morning. Something was draining the energy from my electronics, and maybe from the plants too. A twig snapped behind me and I whirled around. Nothing was there, just mist, swirling and dancing. But now that I was paying attention, I noticed the fog wasn't moving naturally. It flowed against the breeze, curling, and reaching like fingers. And did that tall, swirling column look almost human-shaped? I blinked, and it was just fog again. "Get a grip, Abby," I told myself, but my voice sounded strange in the dead air. Flat, lifeless. I hiked on, trying to find a landmark I recognized or a high point where I might get cell service. The fog grew thicker, closing in around me until I could barely see 10 feet ahead. That's when I found the first real clue, a torn strip of bright blue fabric caught on a thorn bush. It matched the description of a jacket one of the missing hikers had been wearing. I carefully removed it from the thorns and put it in an evidence bag. As I did, I noticed the thorns where the fabric had been caught were covered in frost, despite the mild day. The frost was spreading outward, coating the bush in delicate white crystals while I watched. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying voices that sounded far away. "Help us. Can't find the way out." "They're coming closer." I spun around, trying to locate the source. "Hello? Where are you?" The voices faded. The wind died. The silence returned, heavier than before. Night would be falling in a few hours, and I needed to find shelter. Being in these woods after dark suddenly seemed like the worst idea possible. I consulted my map again, looking for the ranger cabin that should be about 2 miles southeast. If I could reach it before nightfall, I'd have a secure place to spend the night. I set off in what I hoped was the right direction, but the map didn't seem to match the landscape anymore. Hills appeared where there should be valleys. Streams flowed uphill. Nothing made sense. The mist was playing tricks on me, or something in the mist was. As the light began to fade, panic crept in. I'd never been lost in these mountains before, never. Then I noticed something odd about my shadow on the ground ahead of me. It didn't match my movements exactly. When I raised my arm, the shadow raised its arm a half-second later. When I turned my head, the shadow followed after a brief delay. And was it just my imagination, or was the shadow's arm longer than it should be? The fingers more slender and pointed? I started to run, no longer caring about direction, just needing to get away from my own distorted shadow. The mist closed in, and I had the terrible feeling that I was running exactly where something wanted me to go. I don't know how long I ran before I collapsed against the trunk of a massive oak tree, lungs burning, legs shaking. The fog had grown, so thick I could barely see my hand in front of my face. Night was falling fast now, the last gray light fading from the sky. That's when I first saw them clearly. In the mist, about 20 feet away, a shape formed, tall, at least 7 feet, and unnaturally thin. It had the basic shape of a human, but wrong somehow. The arms hung too low, nearly touching the ground, the legs bent at odd angles, and where the face should be, nothing, just swirling mist. I froze, not even daring to breathe. The figure stood motionless, as if watching me. Then, slowly, it raised one long arm and seemed to beckon. I shook my head, pressing back against the tree. A voice whispered from the fog, not from the direction of the figure, but from behind me, somehow coming through the solid tree trunk. "Abby, help me find the way home." Emma's voice, exactly as I remembered it. "You're not real," I whispered, squeezing my eyes shut. "You're not Emma." "Why did you leave me here, Abby?" The voice continued, now circling around me. "I've been waiting for so long." When I opened my eyes, there were more figures in the mist. 5, maybe 6 of them, arranging themselves in a loose circle around me. They moved without walking, gliding through the fog like it was part of them. Or they were part of it. I pulled out my flashlight with trembling hands and switched it on. The beam passed right through the nearest figure, illuminating the trees behind it. But for just a moment, I thought I saw something solid inside. A framework of pale sticks arranged in a shape that might have been a skeleton, floating in the center of the misty body. The temperature plummeted. My breath came out in thick white. Clouds, and the air burned my lungs. Frost formed on my eyelashes and the edges of my jacket. The figures were closing in. In desperation, I fumbled for the emergency flare in my pack. My fingers were nearly numb with cold, but I managed to strike. It. Red light burst out, temporarily pushing back the darkness and the fog. The figures retreated instantly, the mist around them swirling in agitation. They didn't like the light, or maybe the heat. Taking advantage of their retreat, I ran again, holding the flare out in front of me like a weapon. The path ahead cleared slightly, the fog pulling back from the light. I had to find shelter, somewhere I could create enough light or heat to keep these things at bay until morning. After what seemed like hours of stumbling through the dark, guided only by my dwindling flare, I spotted a dark opening in a rocky hillside. A cave. Caves weren't safe normally. Bears, unstable rocks, getting lost in tunnel systems, but normal dangers seemed preferable to what was pursuing me. I ducked inside, just as the flare sputtered out. The cave opening was narrow but opened into a larger chamber. My flashlight, working again now that I was away from the mist figures, revealed a space about the size of a small room. And on the walls, paintings, ancient ones, faded red ochre, depicting human figures, animals, and strange elongated shapes that looked unnervingly like what I'd just seen in the mist. Below them were symbols similar to the ones carved into the trees. I moved closer, shining my light directly on them. They had to be Cherokee in origin, the native people who had lived in these mountains for centuries before being forced out. I'd seen similar paintings in protected sites throughout the park, but these were different, more urgent somehow, like warnings rather than records. One image showed tall, thin figures surrounding smaller human ones. Another depicted the same, tall figures emerging from what looked like a cloud or fog bank. A third showed the moon in different phases, with the tall figures appearing only during certain phases. The lunar cycle. I checked my watch, which still showed the date despite the battery issues. Full moon was tonight, as if on cue. A beam of moonlight filtered through a small opening in the cave roof, illuminating another painting I hadn't noticed. This one showed how to ward off the tall figures, circles of fire and something reflective being held up against them. Mirrors, maybe? I dug through my pack. I had matches, some emergency candles, a lighter, and, yes, a small signal mirror I used for emergency communications when radios failed. Outside the cave, the mist was gathering, becoming denser. I could see shapes moving within it, pressing closer to the entrance but not coming inside. A voice called from the fog, a man's voice this time, unfamiliar but frightened. "Hello? Is someone there? Please help. I've been lost for days." It had to be one of the missing hikers, or something pretending to be one. "Who's there?" I called back, staying well inside the cave. "My name's Dan Kowalski. I was hiking with my wife and son when the fog came in. We got separated. Please, I need help finding them." Dan Kowalski was the name of one of the missing hikers from the first group. Disappeared 3 weeks ago. This might really be him. "Mr. Kowalski, I'm Ranger Morris," I called. "Stay where you are. I'm coming to help you." I gathered my supplies, flashlight, signal mirror, lighter, and the hunting knife, and moved cautiously toward the cave entrance. The mist swirled just outside, thicker than ever. "Where are you?" I called. "I can't see you in the fog." "Just a few steps ahead," the voice replied. "Follow my voice." Something felt wrong. The voice was coming from the densest part of the mist, where one of the tall figures had been standing moments before. "Why don't you come toward my light?" I suggested, holding up my flashlight. "I can't," the voice said after a pause. "My leg is injured. Please, just a few steps into the mist. You'll see me." I held up the signal mirror instead, angling it to catch the moonlight and reflect it into the fog. The beam cut through, momentarily illuminating the mist and what was inside it, not an injured hiker. One of the mist figures, its elongated form distorting as the light touched it. And inside, visible for just a split second. Not a skeleton, but a human body, suspended in the center of the misty form like a fly in amber. Unconscious, but intact. Dan Kowalski, the real one, was inside the mist entity. And I suddenly understood what had happened to all the missing hikers. To Emma. They weren't dead. They were taken, absorbed. "Let him go," I shouted, holding the mirror higher. The figure retreated, the mist churning angrily around it. The other shapes moved in, surrounding the cave entrance. More voices began to call. Men, women, even children, all pleading for help, all trying to lure me out into the fog. I backed deeper into the cave, my mind racing. The paintings showed fire keeping the entities at bay. I needed to create a barrier they couldn't cross. With shaking hands, I gathered what little dry wood I could find near the cave entrance and used some pages from my notebook as tinder. The lighter caught, and soon I had a small fire going across the cave mouth. The mist pulled back, the figures retreating from the heat and light. But I knew the fire wouldn't last all night, and I needed to do more than just protect myself. I needed to free the people trapped inside those things. The painting had shown circles of fire around figures that looked like prisoners. If I could create enough heat and light in the right pattern, maybe I could force the entities to release their captives. But to do that, I'd have to leave the safety of the cave and venture back into the forest with these things hunting me. As I sat by my fire, watching the mist curl and retreat, just beyond its light, I knew I had only a few hours until dawn. Whatever I was going to do, it had to be then. The pattern of the painting suggested these entities were weakest at daybreak. I checked my watch again. 3:27 a.m. Dawn would be around 6 UM. less than 3 hours to prepare. I spread out my map and the journal I'd found, looking for any clue about where the entities might be keeping the bulk of their prisoners. The journal mentioned the mist being thickest in the valley where the sun doesn't reach until noon. I knew that place, Shadow Valley, named for exactly that reason. It was less than a mile from the cave, if I was where I thought I was. That had to be where I'd find the missing hikers, where I might even find Emma, or what was left of her after 20 years. Outside, the mist pressed against my fire barrier, testing it. Through the flames, I could see the figures waiting patiently. One of them formed a face briefly, a face I recognized with shocking clarity. Emma, exactly as she looked the day she disappeared, staring at me through the flames with empty eye, sockets in a face made of fog. I didn't sleep. How could I? Instead, I prepared. I tore strips from my spare shirt to make torches, soaking them in the small amount of hand sanitizer I carried. High alcohol content, it would burn. I arranged my flashlight, signal mirror, and emergency candles for quick access. And I studied those cave paintings over and over, committing the protective patterns to memory. Most importantly, I watched the mist entities through my dying fire. They had patterns, too, retreating furthest from direct light, unable to maintain their form when the temperature rose above a certain point, and seemingly unable to enter enclosed spaces like the cave without being invited in somehow. When my watch showed 5:30 a.m., I gathered my makeshift weapons and stood at the cave entrance. The fire had burned down to embers. Beyond it, the mist waited, thicker than ever in the pre-dawn darkness. I took a deep breath, held the signal mirror in one hand and a lit torch in the other, and stepped outside. Immediately, the cold hit me, bone deep and unnatural. The mist swirled excitedly, shapes forming and reforming as they registered my presence. They kept their distance from my torch but began to circle, looking for weakness. I started walking toward Shadow Valley, keeping my light moving. The entities followed but didn't approach. They were patient. They'd been hunting in these mountains for who knows how long. They could wait for me to make a mistake. As I walked, I noticed more strange markings on trees, the same geometric patterns I'd seen before. They were trail markers, I realized. Not made by humans, but by these things, mapping their hunting grounds. The forest began to lighten slightly as dawn approached. The mist thinned in some places, but remained dense in the direction of Shadow Valley. That's when I saw the first body. Not a body exactly. A human shape suspended in midair, wrapped in tendrils of mist that pulsed slightly like a heartbeat. A young man, eyes closed as if sleeping, floating 3 feet off the ground in a standing position. The mist around him was denser, forming a cocoon. I approached cautiously, torch held high. The mist retreated from the heat, temporarily revealing more of the suspended figure. He matched the description of one of the missing hikers. Tom Chen, 26, experienced backpacker, missing for 2 weeks. His chest rose and fell slightly. He was alive. I reached out with my free hand, but before I could touch him, the mist surged, back, curling protectively around him. The temperature dropped sharply. A voice spoke directly behind me. Tom's voice, though his suspended body hadn't moved. "Don't bother. They'll just take you too." I spun around. One of the mist figures had formed into a rough approximation of a human shape, speaking with Tom's voice. "What are you?" I demanded, holding up the torch. "What do you want?" The figure tilted what passed for its head. "We are the Watchers, the Takers, the Mistwalkers. We have many names. You're keeping these people alive. Why?" "We need them," the thing said simply. "Their warmth, their energy, their memories." It glided closer, and I raised my torch defensively. "You've been looking for your sister," it continued in Tom's voice, then shifted to Emma's. "She's here, Abby. She's part of us now." "Let these people go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let Emma go. The figure seemed to consider this. "We could take you instead. 1 for 1. You for your sister." Before I could respond, the first rays of dawn light broke through the trees. The mist. Beings shuddered collectively, their forms becoming less distinct. They were weakening. Now was my chance. I ran toward Shadow Valley, torch blazing. The entities followed but moved more slowly in the growing light. When I reached the edge of the valley, what I saw stopped me in my tracks. Dozens of misty cocoons hung in the air, each containing a person. Men, women, even a few children, all suspended in that strange half-sleep. And at the far end of the valley, a larger mass of mist that pulsed with a faint bluish light. The entity's center. Their heart. The mist figures had formed a loose perimeter around the valley, watching me. They were still wary of my torch, but as the sunlight grew stronger, I could see them starting to withdraw, pulling back into the denser shadows where dawn hadn't reached yet. This was the pattern from the cave paintings. They could only maintain their form in darkness or heavy mist. I began gathering fallen branches and anything else that would burn, creating a circle of potential fires around the nearest cluster of suspended people. The entities watched but didn't interfere, as if curious about what I was doing. When the circle was complete, I began lighting it section by section. The mist pulled back from each new flame, the perimeter gradually shrinking around the captives. "Let them go," I shouted, holding up my signal mirror to reflect the strengthening dawn light into the heart of the mist. The bluish mass at the end of the valley pulsed faster, angrily. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on my eyebrows and the flames flickered dangerously low. Then it began to rain. Just over my fire circle, nowhere else. A localized deluge that threatened to extinguish my carefully built flames. The entities were manipulating the weather, trying to put out my fires. I ran around the circle, shielding the flames with my body, using my emergency candles to relight sections that went out. The cold was so intense that my movements became sluggish, my thoughts foggy. "You can't save them." Emma's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Just like you couldn't save me." One of the mist beings formed directly in front of me, taking Emma's shape completely now. Not just her voice, but her face, her hair, her clothes from that day 20 years ago. "I've been waiting for you," it said with her smile. "We can be together now." It reached out one misty hand. I wanted to take it. God help me, I wanted to so badly. For 20 years, I dreamed of seeing her again. But this wasn't Emma. It was using her against me. Instead of taking the offered hand, I held up my signal mirror, catching the rising sun and reflecting it directly into the mist Emma's face. The figure recoiled, its form dissolving partly before reforming a few feet away. The sun was higher now, its light reaching more of the valley. The mist entities were retreating to the shadows, taking their captives with them. I couldn't let that happen. I ran to the center of my fire circle, right under the nearest cluster of suspended people. The rain had stopped. The entities seemed to have exhausted that particular ability, and I was able to build up my fires again, higher and hotter. The heat rose, surrounding the misty cocoons. They began to pulse faster, the tendrils of mist withdrawing slightly from the heat. I held up my mirror again, directing concentrated sunlight at each cocoon in turn. The mist retreated further. One of the suspended forms twitched, then another. They were waking up. The mist around them churned angrily. The figures that had withdrawn to the shadows began moving forward again despite the growing daylight, converging on my position. They were risking destruction to keep their captives. The first of the suspended people dropped to the ground, a woman in her 30s, gasping and confused. I ran to her side. "Can you stand?" I asked urgently. "We need to move to the center of the fire." She nodded weakly, and I helped her up. Another captive fell nearby, one of the missing hikers I recognized from the search photos. then another and another, all disoriented but alive. The mist entities were losing their hold as the sun rose higher, but they weren't giving up. The temperature dropped again, so severe that the air itself seemed to crystallize. My fires sputtered. The 4 hikers I'd managed to free huddled together in the center of the fire circle, watching in terror as the mist closed in again. I realized with horror that the entities were combining their strength, merging into fewer but more powerful forms. 3 massive mist figures now surrounded us, each at least 10 feet tall. "Stay in the light," I shouted to the freed hikers. "They can't touch you in direct sunlight." But clouds were gathering overhead, unnatural swirling clouds that began to block the sun. They were going to take back their captives, and probably me too. That's when I noticed that several cocoons were still suspended beyond my reach, including one that had been there longer than the others. The mist around it was denser, more established. Through a break in the swirling patterns, I caught a glimpse of the face inside. Emma. After 20 years, she looked exactly the same, suspended in time at 15 years old. The sight of her hit me like a physical blow. One of the giant mist figures noticed my reaction and spoke with dozens of voices at once. "1 for 1, Ranger. You for her." I looked at the freed hikers, terrified but alive. At Emma, eternally 15, neither dead nor truly alive. At the massive mist beings, ancient and patient and hungry. The largest figure extended what passed for a hand, a swirling vortex of mist that reached toward me. "Just step into the mist voluntarily," it said. "That's all it takes." I thought of all the people who had done exactly that over the years, lured by voices of loved ones or promises of rescue. I thought of what the cave paintings had shown. Centuries of these entities feeding on my ancestors. "No deal," I said, lifting my last flare. I struck it and threw it directly at the closest mist giant. It screeched, a sound like wind through a narrow canyon, and recoiled. The sunlight was breaking through the clouds again as the entity's concentration broke. I seized the moment, running toward the cocoon that held Emma. The mist around her was beginning to thin as the entities focused on defending themselves. The nearest entity lunged at me, extending a long, misty arm toward my throat. I ducked and rolled, feeling the unnatural cold of its touch brush against my cheek. Frost immediately formed on my skin, numbing it. "Run!" I shouted to the freed hikers. "Get to higher ground where the sun hits first." They needed no encouragement, scrambling up the slope at the edge of the valley. The mist couldn't follow them into the direct morning sunlight. I was alone now, with the entities. And Emma. Her cocoon hung just 10 feet away, the misty tendrils around her starting to pulse erratically as the sun's rays penetrated deeper into the valley. The entities were losing strength, but they still had enough power to be deadly. I reached for my signal mirror and held it up, directing a concentrated beam of sunlight at Emma's cocoon. The mist around her writhed and thinned. I could see her face clearly now. Peaceful, like she was just sleeping. Like no time had passed. "Emma," I whispered. "I'm here." The largest entity, still maintaining its massive form in the shadows, spoke. Again, this time with my sister's voice. "She can't hear you. She's been ours for 20 years. What makes you think she would even want to go back now?" I ignored it, keeping my mirror focused on Emma's cocoon. The mist around her was retreating, but not fast enough. The sun would soon move past its optimal angle, and the entities would regain some strength in the shadows. What I needed was more reflective surface, more light. I looked around desperately and spotted something half buried in the ground nearby. A weathered purple backpack, faded by years of exposure but still recognizable. Emma's backpack. I lunged for it, tearing it open. Inside were the preserved remains of her belongings. A water bottle, a candy bar turned to dust, a notebook with pages, stuck together from moisture. And at the bottom, what I was hoping for, her compact mirror, the one Mom had given her for her 13th birthday. Around me, the mist entities were gathering, abandoning the other cocoons to protect this one. They knew what I was trying to do. I grabbed the compact and flipped it open. The mirror inside was still intact. Now I had two reflective surfaces. I positioned myself beneath Emma's cocoon, one mirror in each hand, angling them to create a crossbeam of reflected sunlight that cut through the heart of the misty shroud. The mist shuddered and began to pull away from her. I could see her eyelids fluttering. The ground beneath me turned white with frost as the entities fought back, dropping the temperature to levels that made my breath crystallize in midair. My fingers began to go numb, the mirrors slipping in. My grasp. One of the entities swept forward, its misty arm knocking the compact from my hand. It shattered against a rock, the mirror breaking into useless fragments. "You've lost," Emma's voice said from the mist. "Just like you lost me 20 years ago." The cold was becoming unbearable. My movement slowed as hypothermia began to set in, but I kept my last mirror pointed at Emma's cocoon, even as ice formed on my eyelashes and my vision blurred. The cocoon was almost completely exposed now. The mist pulled back to expose Emma fully. She hung there, suspended, only a few tendrils of mist still connected to her. She was so close. After 20 years of searching, my sister was right in front of me. But the entities weren't giving up. They swarmed around me, their cold so intense that my clothes began to stiffen with frost. The mirror in my hand was growing too cold to hold. I had one last chance. I threw my hunting knife at the few remaining tendrils connecting Emma to the mist. The blade sliced through them cleanly, and Emma began to fall. I lunged forward, dropping the mirror to catch her before she hit the ground. The moment I let go of my only protection, the mist surged around both of us, wrapping us in its freezing embrace. Through the swirling whiteness, I saw Emma's eyes open. For the first time in 20 years, she looked at me. Really looked at me. "Abby?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the edge of the valley where the sunlight was strongest. The mist clung to us, slowing our movement. I could feel it trying to seep into me, to take me as it had taken Emma. My hand, the one holding Emma, was going numb, the fingers turning white with frostbite. But I didn't let go. "We're getting out," I gasped through chattering teeth. Both of us. Emma was weak, barely able to stand, but together we stumbled toward the light. The mist entities swirled in fury around us, voices crying out in a cacophony of stolen sounds. The edge of the sunlight was just a few feet away when I felt Emma being pulled backward. "They won't let me go," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "They've had me too long." I tightened my grip on her hand. "I am not losing you again." With one final surge of strength, I threw myself forward into the sunlight, dragging Emma with me. The mist retreated instantly, unable to follow us into the direct light. We collapsed on the ground, gasping. I looked at Emma, really looked at her. She was exactly as I remembered. 15 years old, not a day older than when she'd vanished. I was now 20 years older than my little sister. "How long?" she asked, her voice small. 20 years, I said gently. She nodded slowly, taking this in. It felt like a dream, a long, cold dream. I could see everything they did, everyone they took, but I couldn't stop it. I helped her sit up, both of us watching the mist entities retreat into the deepest shadows of the valley. They were weakened, but not destroyed. The cocoons of the captives they still held, at least 2 that I could see, were being pulled deeper into the shadows with them. "We have to help the others," Emma said, following my gaze. I looked down at my left hand, the one that had been exposed to the most intense cold while holding on to Emma. The fingers were white and numb, severe frostbite. I might lose some of Them. But Emma was alive. We will, I promised. But not today. We need help. More light. More people. She nodded, understanding. Then she looked up at me, really seeing the woman I'd become. You became a ranger, she said, noticing my uniform. For the first time. I never stopped looking for you, I told her. In the valley below, the mist entities had withdrawn completely into the shadows with their remaining captives. But I knew they'd return with the next full moon, just as they had for centuries. Next. Time, though, we'd be ready, with fire and light and mirrors. As Emma and I made our slow way back toward the ranger station, I radioed ahead. They wouldn't believe what had happened, not at first. They'd come up with explanations for the 4 rescued hikers, for Emma's impossible youth, for my frostbitten hand. The Park Service would officially attribute the incidents to unusual weather, phenomena, and hiker inexperience. They'd quietly restrict access to Shadow Valley during the full moon, but they wouldn't tell the public why. But I knew the truth now, and I would be back. Next full moon, with floodlights and mirrors and enough fire to force those things to release every single person they'd taken. The mist had Emma for 20 years. It wouldn't have anyone else. As we crested the ridge, Emma suddenly stopped and looked back at the valley we'd left. I followed her gaze. The mist was already beginning to form again in the shadows, swirling in patterns that almost looked like hands grasping at the air. They're still calling me, she whispered. I can still hear them. I put my arm around her shoulders. Don't listen. They're not part of you anymore. But as we walked away, I couldn't help wondering if that was true. 20 years in the mist. What had it done to her? What part of her was still connected to those things? And how many others were still trapped, waiting for someone to bring the light that would set them free? I tightened my grip on my sister's shoulder and didn't look back again. The mist would be waiting when I returned, and next time, I'd be ready.